Chapter 198. Yin Chang. Chapter 198. Yin Chang. Fei Xing no longer dared to belittle Yin Chang. The power of last night's dagger had been shockingly terrifying. Fei Xing had never even heard of that sort of formation before. If not for the sudden appearance of the firearms, they would have already been in the city of Fanzhou this morning. Having been startled out of his drunken stupor by the firearms, Yin Chang held the bowl in his hands and craned his neck to ask, "What the heck are those things?" Fei Xing was staking their victory entirely on the old man this time. Seeing Yin Chang's empty bowl, he hurriedly filled it up again. "Firearms? Have you never heard of them before?" Yin Chang shook his head like a rattledrum. One, he had spent half of his life in Xizhou, and the highest-ranking official he had ever met was Zhou Gui. He could not even list out all the 8 great training divisions, let alone know of the Chunquan battalion. He was truly an old country bumpkin, a barely literate man who had never read a single book on warfare and relied entirely on feeling his way through battles. "What's that?" It exploded with a bang, like a strike of lightning. Yin Chang crushed up the dry rations. "We'll get struck before even making it up to the front. How are we supposed to fight this war? It can only play its users for fools." Fei Xing drew himself closer to Yin Chang. Both of them were equally filthy and covered in blood from head to toe. With his fingers, Fei Xing made a circle the size of a gun muzzle and showed it to Yin Chang. The reason why the cavalry didn't move yesterday was because they were loading their firearms. It takes effort to get it to fire from this opening, and it only works if they're in close proximity. They blindsided us this time. Damn it. Now that I think about it, it's possible that those are all the firearms they have, and they used it just for the specific purpose of scaring us. Yin Chang finally kind of understood it. "Oh, aren't those firecrackers then?" "You're absolutely correct. Think of them as firecrackers. It can't hit you if you run far enough." Fearing that Yin Chang would be cowed by the firearms and would not dare to launch further attacks, Fei Xing went to great pains to explain to him. "Think about it. If this stuff was really that good to use, why did Chunquan battalion only use it to perform for the emperor? It doesn't work as well in battles." Fei Xing did not lie. Why did the Chunquan battalion set the firearms on the back burner? Precisely because it was hard to use. Loading them took time. Use them in street fights, and the firearms would probably still be in the midst of warming up even when the enemy's blades had already slit their throats. But pull away from the enemy, and the lethality of the firearms would plummet. Furthermore, the recoil would also make it difficult to aim accurately. It even burns asses. Yin Chang was still nursing a grudge over that fired round last night. He thought for a moment while staring at the campfire. "Are these things expensive?" "Very." Fei Xing soaked the dry rations in the bowl and gobbled it down whole. "Even the imperial bodyguards don't have the blueprint. They are manufactured by the Ministry of Works under the supervision of the Ministry of War. The quantity is limited every time, and they even come with numbers engraved on them." Yin Chang promptly bared his stained, yellow teeth at Fei Xing in a grin. "Then fuck it. I only fear that those firecrackers are cheap. Fanzhou is so broke-ass poor now, so how would they bear to use expensive stuff as they please? It's great if its reach is limited. I don't for the life of me believe they can cower like tortoises in there for their entire lives." Door panels swung and slammed under the intense howl of the north wind. The streets of Fanzhou were strewn with corpses all over. King Yi's tattered banner fluttered in the wind as beggars fought over it to keep themselves warm. The entrance of the Yamen's wind shelter was crammed with hundreds of people, most of which were the elderly, weak, women, and children. All the young and healthy men in their families had either been abducted away by the bandits or hoodwinked by King Yi into joining his army. These people, so famished they were all skin and bones, were all here to beg for food. This winter wind was so penetratingly freezing that people were dying of the cold every night. Brother Hu wishes to open the granaries and distribute the grains to the people. Yang Qiu, a bandit of Fanzhou sitting on the Taisher chair too with his leg propped, said with a merry smile. It's a good thing. We are all for it. But the Zizhou garrison troops are right at our city gates now, and the soldiers in the front line can't go hungry. As long as the soldiers don't starve, you can distribute the grains to whoever you want. Both sides of the hall were packed with people standing or sitting. They were all bandits from Fanzhou and Dengzhou. Yin Chang was right in his guess. To guard against the Zizhou garrison troops, King Yi had assembled together the troops from both prefectures in the hope of bargaining with Shen Zichuan at the critical moment. But who knew? He invited a wolf into his own house and brought disaster upon himself instead. In the end, he was killed by Hua Lingyun and these people the latter was colluding with. Sitting on King Yi's seat, Hua Lingyun said, "The city has run out of food, so I will have to borrow grains from my various brothers here. Shen Zichuan has sealed off the routes to the west, and the traveling merchants no longer dare to come this way anymore. After the 10th month, all I've been eating are fucking stale grains." Yang Qiu felt resentful just to bring up the matter. "I was even thinking of borrowing grains from all of you. Old Fang the 10th, you were working hand in glove with King Yi, and must have had your fair share of licking his balls, so don't dare you sit here with us and pretend to be poor." Old Fang the 10th, who had a penchant for men, felt so self-conscious on hearing this that his face blanched with anger. He clenched his walnuts and sneered. "What a bunch of bull! Drop that hoodlum act of yours. My grains have long been used to make up for the military grains, feeding ingrates like you. The fuck we fighting a battle for when we have no grains?" Yang Qiu said with ill intentions. "Might as well run while we can." "Run?" Old Fang the 10th spat. "The entire territory to the northwest has been choked off by Shen Zichuan. Either you go over to Tianfei Watchtower and surrender to Commander-in-Chief Qi, or you go over to the Chaosha River and work in cahoots with the Bianxia people. Isn't Shen Zichuan going to attack Duanzhou in the 2nd month? Say we mess up the game for him and leave an opening in Zhongbua, would he still dare to throw his weight around here?" These people were bandits. At first, they heard Shen Zichuan and Shao Qie had killed Lei Changming in Xizhou, and then they got wind that Shen Zichuan had killed Kai Yu in Chazhou, followed by Lei Jingzhe in Dunzhou. All the big-name bandit leaders in Zhongbua had met their fucking ends in Shen Zichuan's hands. Even if they thought with their feet, they knew Shen Zichuan would never let them off. Yang Qiu initially thought Hua Lingyun was not qualified enough to hold down the situation. He had come here to fish in troubled waters. His plan was to haul King Yi's money vault away before the city was breached, but when he arrived, he found Old Fang and all these other people having designs on the money vault too. Everyone was presently sitting here mutually scheming against one another, each of them only too anxious for the others to hurry up and die. Although Hua Lingyun was sitting at the head, he was willing to play second fiddle. Without showing any expression, he said, "On the contrary, there's no need to be overly anxious. Shen Zichuan sent an old man this time, one without prestige and capability. What's more, he's timid. He won't get anywhere." It was true that Yin Chang had no reputation to speak of, but Yin Chang had disposed of nearly half of their soldiers with just one appearance. Hua Lingyun himself was the one who went out to fight last night's battle, the details of which he kept mum about. All Yang Qiu and Old Fang the 10th knew was that they had suffered severe casualties. Yang Qiu thought of Hua Lingyun as just a pretty face who was all looks and no substance, practically good for nada. Even so, he still had a smile on his face as he said, "That's right. Brother Hua comes from a distinguished family. The hell does an old country bumpkin like him think he is? I'm only worried about food, nothing else. If we keep up with this rate of consumption, we won't last until spring even if we repel the Zizhou garrison troop." "Then what do you have in mind?" Old Fang the 10th said sarcastically, "Let's hear your brilliant ideas." Yang Qiu rolled his eyes at him and looked at Hua Lingyun. "Yen Haru still has shops in Dunzhou. Let's trade King Yi's family assets for grains with him. He doesn't acknowledge anything except money, so he will definitely do us this favor. As long as we can survive this winter, the throne of King Yi will be as good as brother was. It won't be too late for us to recruit soldiers and buy horses then. Old Fang X listened to Yang Qiu's nonsensical boasts, but did not speak up to warn Huo Lingyun. Huo Lingyun was exactly his type, but he had seen King Yi's mutilated corpse back at the yamen, which the dogs had gnawed until it was all unrecognizable. He could not help but have the sense that he was not beyond sharing the same fate too. Having remained close to King Yi these past 6 months, Huo Lingyun was not aware of the situation outside. Looking as if he believed Yang Qiu's words, he said, "But with the garrison troops besieging the city now, how are we going to conduct this business with Yan Heru's shop? My people are most familiar with the areas in Dunzhou. I can use Luris eyes too." Yang Qiu had some monkey business going on with Suiqing, and he had tagged along for a few rides when Suiqing went to Dunzhou for business in the past. "If Brother Hua is willing to trust me, I'll make a trip for you." Old Fang X instantly turned hostile. "So you have it all plotted out, huh?" They snapped at each other and incriminated one another, neither willing to give in. King Yi's money was future life insurance for them, and no one was willing to share it with the others. As such, they remained locked in a stalemate here, making the atmosphere rather tense and heavy. Yang Qiu had no way to refute old Fang X's words. He grew more and more restless with anxiety as he sat here, worried that Huo Lingyun could not hold up against the Zizhou's garrison troops, so he steeled himself, deciding to kill them all and grab the money tonight. A Fanzhou soldier stationed on the city wall was relieving himself at a corner when he suddenly heard several whistles coming from below. He fastened his pants. Not daring to stick his head out directly, he glanced down from the middle of the battlement. A bonfire was blazing in the wilderness, and the Zizhou garrison troops had taken up formation in front of the city walls with their shields held up, yet they had not sounded the war horn. Yin Chang stood at the very front and took a few gulps of wine before shouting, "Is King Yi here? Call him up the city wall. Let's have a little chat." The taste of being pierced by the dagger squad's sharp blades the night before was still vivid in the Fanzhou troops' minds. Yin Chang looked exactly like an old maniac when he chased after them, and the impact of that encounter still lingered. The platoon commander of Fanzhou, a bandit under Yang Qiu, had been specially assigned here by Huo Lingyun. He leaned over the battlement and spat at Yin Chang. "Chat my ass. Don't even think about tricking us out of the city." Not to be outdone, Yin Chang cursed back. "All of you in Fanzhou are fucking wimps. Cowering cowards like you are not even fit to kiss my ass. Bah, little brats. Do you even have the balls to fight battles? Get your ass down here and carry our prefectural lord's shoes." Yin Chang, having hung out in the streets in his youth, spontaneously blurted out all the obscenities that came to his mind. With wine to add to his fun, he could stand here and curse for 3 days and 3 nights without ever repeating himself. His words were crude and vulgar as he swore with great relish and led the garrison troops to jeer with him. Having such a merry time, it was as though he was celebrating the spring festival. The platoon commander, having served under Yang Qiu, had become accustomed to throwing his weight around in Dengzhou. Even King Yi himself treated him with courtesy when he came to Fanzhou. Seething with resentment now, especially after getting chased all around by Yin Chang and even stabbed in the buttocks last night, he propped himself against the battlement and let loose a torrent of verbal abuse. The moment the platoon commander retorted, Yin Chang waved his hand to instigate the Zizhou garrison troops behind him to holler back with a litany of curses. The platoon commander was unable to beat them in might, and his voice was drowned out. Furious, he pounded the wall hard and commanded those at his sides, "Shoot him." The Fanzhou troops swiftly put up their bows, and the Zizhou garrison troops below them promptly took to their heels. They cursed as they ran while the arrows rained down noisily on the shields they were equipped with. Once they were out of the Fanzhou troops' range, They stood at the perimeter and started to boo in unison at the top of the city walls. Yin Chang leaped beyond the shooting range and raised both hands to signal for them to sound the war horn at the back. The old man's ruddy face was glowing as he yelled, "Fanzhou!" The Zizhou garrison troops responded in chorus, "Is all as chicken as they come." Yin Chang shouted again, and King Yi, the Zizhou garrison troops continued, "Is a fucking cur." The Fanzhou arrows could not reach them. Soldiers of all ranks leaned over the battlements, trying to get a swear word in as they cussed back. A pity its effect was minimal. Yin Chang even composed a ditty for the Zizhou garrison troops, which they hollered at an ear-splitting volume from where they stood. Half of the platoon commander's body was already sticking out as he cussed until his face turned livid with rage. He bellowed across the air, "I dare you to repeat that, you old buffoon! I'll slice off your rotten tongues. Bring it on." Yin Chang seemed to be drunk as he stepped on the snow and turned around in circles. As he clapped his hands he said, "If you don't come, I'll take you as my daughter." "Daughter, heh?" He pinched his fingers and twisted around to look back at the platoon commander at the top of the city wall, imitating the latter as he said in a shrill voice, "I'll slice off your rotten tongues and tear off your faces." Yin Chang was already advanced in years, and he had so many wrinkles on his face, he could even make a flower pattern with them. Yet his imitation of a woman was absolutely spot on, having gotten that feminine charm more or less down pat as he stomped his foot and sent pieces of ice beneath it skipping all over. The platoon commander's face blanched. The composition of the Fanzhou troops was a rather complicated one. The men could not be considered soldiers at all. Sworn enemies and adversaries were even thrown into a squad together, so who knows? Perhaps they were all now laughing behind the platoon commander's back on seeing him humiliated. The platoon commander had never before experienced such humiliation. He shoved aside the soldier next to him and ordered, "Prepare the horse." The soldier hurriedly chased after him and said, "Hua, fuck that Hua." The platoon commander abruptly yanked up a soldier and barked at him. "I'm Chief Yang's foreman. Huolingyun was still a wee kid wetting his pants when I was back there in Dengzhou killing the garrison troops in. Is he even fit to command me? Bring out the guns." The sight of Yin Chang scampering away like a frightened rat from the firearms last night was still fresh in the platoon commander's mind. They had lost half their men in the tussle with Yin Chang then, when Yin Chang had split them up with his formation. But with the city of Fanzhou right behind them tonight, they had even more confidence than they did last night. At most, they would retreat back if they had to. What was there to be afraid of? Either way, they had horses. If Yin Chang still dared to pursue them after they withdrew into the city with their bows at the ready, he would be courting death. Yin Chang tugged up his trousers. The old man reached back for the hilt of his blade. He dropped the merriment, his cloudy eyes as quiet as this expanse of the night sky as he adjusted his breathing, a strategy he had thought of on his own. As long as he calmed his breathing before a battle, he would be able to stand firm on his feet. There were incredibly gifted generals in this world. They were young and were not only ambitious but also dazzlingly brilliant. But there was also another kind of general who never had the opportunity to make a name for themselves. They always had their backs to the firmament of heaven, their eyes solely on the small piece of land beneath their feet. Yin Chang was long past his prime. The instant the city gates opened, Yin Chang once again felt a rush of fighting spirit coursing through his body. That was the desire that had been burning within him to this very day. He could not see the onslaught of old age assailing him. He was still as young as he had once been. The fervor that blazed anew in him let him draw his blade without the slightest decrease in his speed at all. Win one battle, even if he was no famous general. Chapter 199, Triumphant Return. Chapter 199, Triumphant Return. As Yang Qiu left the yamen and stood under the eaves, he saw the commoners who were seeking refuge in the wind shelter. Finding it just his luck to come across them, he spat and ground it with his foot. "Are you people dead?" he said to the men in attendance. Huolingyun may be ignorant, but all of you too? The poor are like venereal diseases. It'll be too late to cry by the time they infect the yamen. The men behind him responded with fear and trepidation and hurried over to berate and drive the commoners away. Yang Qiu got on the carriage and closed his eyes to rest, fuming as he recalled the conversation in the yamen. Midway through his journey, his subordinate suddenly piped up through the curtain, "Chief, there's a message." Yang Qiu opened his eyes. "Tell me." "Old Fang X has not returned to his residence at all," the subordinate said. He resorted to trickery to shake off the informer following him, then swapped out the carriage and made a beeline for the money vault. Yang Qiu promptly pulled the carriage curtain open and glared for a moment. Fearing that he had already lost the opportunity to get a jump on the others, he said, "Quick, gather our men." In less than an hour, the subordinate reported back that the Tizhou garrison troops had attacked the city. The platoon commander had charged out with firearms in hand, but he had not even reached the garrison troops when the imperial bodyguards, who had been lying in wait for a long time, broke his head with one clean, efficient twist. As the turn of events had been so unexpected and sudden, the city gates were not shut in time, and now the banners at the top of the city wall had all been set on fire. Yang Qiu's face turned deathly pale when he heard about the death of the platoon commander. Holding on to the carriage door, he looked towards the city walls, where he saw that there was indeed a raging fire against a backdrop of purplish clouds. The 4,000 men that Yang Qiu had brought along had filled in for half of the spots at the top of the city walls. At first, in order to have a hold over Huolingyun, he had arranged to place the fiercely strong men under his command there too. Who could have known that they would be so easily killed by the garrison troops? Yang Qiu flew into a sudden rage. Is he out of his mind? The heck he's defending the city for? It's not even my fucking city. Bring along your broadswords and head right over to the money vault. If you come across that old Fang Ke, hack him to pieces. Once you're done loading the money and valuables into the chests, leave immediately. A flurry of footsteps resonated throughout the city as the bandits' boots trampled over the slurry of snow, sending the slush splattering over the legs of their pants and smearing it with streaks across the hems of their robes. Sounds of whistles fused into one. No one could tell who was who when the several gangs bumped into one another. Without so much a word, all of them first drew their blades to cut the others down to the ground. Puddles and puddles of blood coagulated in the snow. The bandits, in hankering after the money vaults, were all frantic with anxiety. When Yang Qiu barged into the money vault, he saw stacks upon stacks of treasure chests. He pried open the nearest chest, which was filled to the brim with dazzling gold. All at once, Yang Qiu was frozen in place, unable to move his feet an inch. He gathered them up into his bosom several times and wept with joy. King Yi really is rich. Shen Zichuan had locked off the northwest of Zhonghua, and Yang Qiu was feeling quite suffocated from being boxed in. But now that he had gold, he would be able to bribe his way out of Shen Zichuan's encirclement, even if that meant he had to drop a ton of money to do so. Move them, quick! Yang Qiu stared fixedly at the gold in his arms. Move them all onto the carriages. Yang Qiu's horse carriages were parked in the money vault's courtyard, but there were too many chests, and they were all exceedingly heavy. They had only moved half of the chests when Yang Qiu's fleets could no longer take more. However, he was unwilling to leave the rest of the chests behind, so he had his subordinates go and snatch more carriages. Having just arrived, old Fang X got all anxious the moment he got off his horse carriage. Waving his handkerchief, he yelled, "Block him! Don't let him leave!" The door to the money vault was narrow. A great number of bandits, greedy as they were for money, had hidden the gold on them when they were inside moving the chests, only to be slashed to death by Yang Qiu when he found them out. He had already lost his mind and could not tolerate anyone fighting with him over the money. Just as they were moving the chests, Old Fong the Tenth's fleet of horse carriages entered from the back and mixed in along with the other party's carriages, forming a jumbled mess that completely blocked off access to the courtyard door. Leading his men, Old Fong the Tenth leaped his way across the carriages into the courtyard and hacked away at Yang Chio's men whenever they encountered one. Yang Chio's subordinates were all crowding in the spaces between the carriages, and with their hands full with the chests, they did not even have the chance to fight back. A slash of the blade, and they all toppled over to the ground dead. Old Fong the Tenth cursed, "Sneaky son of a bitch! Return the money!" Wiping away the blood on his face, Yang Chio kicked the money vault door open and charged in with blade in hand to hack away at the men. They slaughtered one another in this cramped and narrow space. Blood colored the chests a deep shade of red. The carriages at the back were still jostling against one another, knocking over the chests that had yet to be secured in place. Rocks tumbled all over the ground. "Rocks," someone shouted. "Why the fuck are these rocks?" Yang Chio and Old Fong the Tenth stopped at the same time and saw the rocks rolling on the ground. Yang Chio panicked. Not bothering with killing anymore, he turned and lunged at a horse carriage and smashed a chest open, only to see that it was all rocks inside too. Only a few chests on these dozen or so carriages contained gold, the rest were all rocks. Under the sound of chests being opened, Yang Chio's legs went weak. He supported himself against the carriage, his eyes so bloodshot they were about to drip with blood. Old Fong the Tenth looked all around in a fluster. "We've been had." A carriage at the entrance of the courtyard suddenly moved as someone stomped it through the door. Following right after, the courtyard door banged shut. Liquid poured down from the top of the walls all around. A bandit who was close by took a sniff, and the color promptly drained from his face as he exclaimed in a panic, "Kerosene!" Smashed down the door. Old Fong the Tenth clung on to the horse carriages and jostled his way to the entrance of the courtyard, where he yelled, "Quick, smash down the door!" Huo Lingyun stepped on the snow at the top of the wall. The night was so freezing cold his hands had turned blue. Yang Chio heard the sound of flint being struck and bellowed, "Huo Lingyun, you son of a bitch!" Huo Lingyun clutched a bunch of yellowish papers. These were all notices that King Yi posted outside the yamen. He set those nonsensical lies on fire and, under the glow of the licking flames, said with repulsion to Yang Chio, "Go to hell." Trails of fire suddenly blazed forth and swept through the courtyard of the money vault like tempestuous waves. There were not only rocks in the chests but also flammable weed. The waves of flames engulfed everyone, and Yang Chio and Old Fong the Tenth struggled in the blaze. They rolled on the ground, cursing Huo Lingyun venomously amidst blood-curdling screams. Huo Lingyun watched the raging fire. Like belated firecrackers, the sound of splitting and crackling flesh exhilarated him. He roared with laughter under the stench of charred flesh, his eyes equally bloodshot from having stayed up all night. "Burn! Burn these scums to death!" Power and influence were a bunch of crock. All he ever desired was for these people to pay with their lives. From King Yi to Tsueching, and from Yang Chio to Old Fong the Tenth. Not a single one of them shall get away scot-free. Left with no means of escape, the bandits pounded on the wall with their arms and wailed in the raging fire. Kerosene got on them as they rolled about, and the inferno tore away their hair and burned them to an unrecognizable crisp. The flames made their way out of the compound, blazing all the way along the eaves of the houses and setting the whole of Fanzhou ablaze. Who's setting the city on fire? Yin Chang, who was carrying the platoon commander's head in hand, was in such a state of anxiety that he stomped his foot. The prefectural lord still has to pay out of pocket for the damages after it's done burning. Fei Xing wiped away the bloodstains and looked in the direction where the flames lit up the sky. Internal strife, the city gates had been breached, and no one came to their aid. Distracted and fatigued from shooting all those arrows, the Fanzhou soldiers defending the city did not even put up a decent attempt at resistance the moment they saw the platoon commander dead. Fei Xing returned to his senses and signaled with his eyes to the imperial bodyguards behind him to search the whole city and seize all the firearms. In the gap of time when Yin Chang was not cussing at others, he had a craving for wine, and he insisted on drinking 2 cups after the battle was fought and won. He scratched his cheeks with his empty hand and handed the still warm head to Fei Xing as though he was giving him a gift. Take him. Keep him well. Fei Xing dodged out of the way to avoid the blood. Why the hell are you always carrying him around? Looking as though he treasured the thing, Yin Chang said with a cheeky laugh, Heh, hand it over to the prefectural lord on returning as evidence for meritorious service rendered. Fei Xing felt a chill run down his spine the moment he thought of that scene. Shen Zichuan wore all white when he sat in the front hall. Push this bloody thing over, and he would have to die if a drop of the blood so much as splattered onto Shen Zichuan's folding fan. He hurriedly took the head and, while Yin Chang was preoccupied drinking his wine, shoved it to a junior soldier and sent him out to bury it. Sure enough, the Zizhou garrison troops returned in triumph. Zhou Gui set up a welcome reception by the city gates to receive them. As encouragement for these new soldiers, he had the kitchen prepare a spread of roasted meat and grilled fish to let them eat their fill. While the soldiers stopped at the gates, the commanding general had to enter to meet the prefectural lord. Yin Chang did not even dare to take a sip of his wine today. He followed Fei Xing into the residence. The door to the study was open, and Kong Ling and the rest were all waiting by the steps. Upon seeing them enter, Kong Ling immediately came forward to welcome them. Elder Yin, Kong Ling smiled at Yin Chang. A warrior's treasured blade truly never ages. Looks like you still have it in you. Yin Chang was on familiar terms with him. He craned his head to look in and asked softly, The prefectural lord is inside? Waiting for you. Kong Ling guided them up the step. Aware that Yin Chang always went weak at the knees whenever he met officials, Kong Ling made a special effort to say to him, The prefectural lord was the one who personally assigned you to this battle, so there's no need for me to tell you what that sentiment means. Just answer the questions his lordship asks of you later accordingly. Don't worry and just relax. Fei Xing answered from the side. I'll back Elder Yin, I won't let him blunder before his lordship. It would have been fine if they hadn't mentioned it. The moment they did, Yin Chang's legs turned into jelly. He placed his hands on the steps for support in a panic, scrambled to his feet with an "oh my" and asked after Kong Ling, What's his lordship gonna ask? What if I can't answer? Kong Ling turned back and was just about to answer when Yin Chang's body odor, the result of not bathing for 2 months, hit him full on and made him so dizzy he could not continue the conversation. Earlier, he had been standing somewhere windy to receive them and so did not notice the smell, but now that they were already standing right before the hanging screen, it was too late to withdraw. Kong Ling threw Fei Xing a look. Why didn't you remind Elder Yin to take a bath? Fei Xing felt suffocated with aggravation building up in his chest. He wanted to respond, I told him to, but he wouldn't do it, so what was I supposed to do? This crafty old man even had a ton of excuses at his disposal. What was that about winter being too cold, and it was more practical to be dirty since they had to march the troops to war and the accumulation of dirt could keep them warm and prevent their feet from freezing in their sleep and all that hogwash. The hanging screen had already been lifted, so Kong Ling could only enter. Out of habit, Yin Chang lifted his leg to stride across the threshold, only to realize that this doorway had no threshold. With Yao Wenyu in a wheelchair, Shen Zichuan had long gotten someone to tear down the thresholds inside and outside the residence. Yin Chang gently set his foot down and shuffled in. Shen Zichuan had seen Yin Chang before, but it had been from a distance away. Previously, when the garrison troops had yet to be rebuilt, the Imperial Army was the one who fought against the bandits from Mount Luo. Later, during the period when the garrison troops were recruiting, Shen Zichuan made several consecutive trips outdoors, so both men could more or less recognize the other. Shen Zichuan was wearing a wide-sleeved robe over his regular wear today in a shade so white, he looked ethereally pure and untainted. He sat in the master's seat and watched as Yin Chang entered. Kong Ling said, "Your lordship, this is—" Kong Ling had not even finished his words when Yin Chang fell to his knees on the ground. A series of thud, thud, thud rang out as the old man kowtowed repeatedly in Shen Zichuan's direction. "This has all gone to the dogs," Fei Xing thought as he kneeled to kowtow too. Once he was done, he hurried to help Yin Chang up. But how would the advisors behind them know what was going on? They had only just entered when they saw those in front of them kneeling, and thinking that the prefectural lord was in a rage, they followed suit and kneeled too. The atmosphere in the hall turned weird. The prefectural lord, suspected of being enraged, grasped his folding fan, the words he was about to say all but cut off by their kowtows. He floundered, for it wouldn't do for him to remain seated, and it wouldn't do for him to stand up either. Yao Wenyu was quick to react. He bent over from his wheelchair and spoke gently to Yin Chang before him. "Elder Yin headed into battle and narrowly escaped death, so it is not unusual for you to feel worked up upon seeing his lordship. But your return in triumph today is a joyful occasion, so let us not be so somber." From the side, Yao Wenyu's words appeared to be praising Shen Zichuan's judicious selection of a general, which inspired such gratitude in the old general that he was moved to the point of tears. At the same time, he was also telling the advisors at the back that this pair of master and servant was on good terms with each other and that all was well between them. It was then Shen Zichuan figured out what to say. "It has been hard advancing the army. Fei Xing, help Elder Yin up. Gentlemen, please get up as well and sit as you would." Fei Xing helped Yin Chang up, but how would Yin Chang dare to look at Shen Zichuan? He exercised the caution he applied in battle and did not even dare to breathe too hard. Kong Ling was between laughter and tears. What had initially been a pretty relaxed atmosphere was destroyed by this one kneel of Yin Chang, and now everyone was finding it ill-advised to be all smiles. Fortunately, Shen Zichuan had sway over the atmosphere in the hall. He lowered his voice and was much gentler than usual. He was in no rush as he asked Yin Chang about the food and clothing while on the move and the weather on their journey back. After a series of questions and answers, Yin Chang's answers flowed a lot more smoothly. It was then Shen Zichuan cut to the chase. Fei Xing had initially planned on covering it up, but Yin Chang's body odor was just too strong. It was not that big of a deal for the old man to skip bathing for 2 months, but having just returned from the battlefield, they were reeking all over from head to toe with the stench of blood, a stench which was presently being amplified by the heat within the hall. Sitting downwards of Kong Ling, Yu Xiaozai was listening to the exchange when he suddenly caught a whiff of a certain odor. Distracted, he attempted to decipher the scent, thinking that it was similar to a mix of rancid rice and stinky feet, and yet it also resembled salted fish soaking in swill. It was a smell like he had never smelled before, a one-of-a-kind odor like nothing else. What's more, this odor, a sharp and intense, was a force to behold. In no time, it pervaded the entire hall and lingered at such intensity that Fei Xing, who had an acute sense of smell, near about fainted. Shen Zichuan's expression remained unchanged throughout. Anyone else could cover their noses with their sleeves, but not Shen Zichuan. Yin Chang had fought the battle for him, so if he were to reveal any hint of disdain here, he would be hurting the old man's feelings. Moreover, in consideration of the earlier defeat, the rewards accorded to Yin Chang were not all that generous, at least on the surface. If Shen Zichuan were to cover his nose, that would give those beneath him the guts to belittle Yin Chang. Unaware of what it was like around him due to his odor, Yin Chang gesticulated wildly as he told Shen Zichuan about the firearms in Fanzhou, his excitement increasing as he rambled on. Xiao Qie, who had been staying over at the Beiyuan military drill grounds for the past few days, was late to arrive. He had hurried over for the specific purpose of meeting this old man when he heard of the latter's return. Having made his way under the eaves, he did away with the briefing. Gu Jin was helping Xiao Qie remove his coat when he took a sudden sniff and revealed a horrified expression. Seeing the change in Gu Jin's expression, Xiao Qie asked in puzzlement, "What's wrong?" Before Gu Jin could respond, he heard a crash from the hall, followed by Yu Xiaozai's panicked voice. Why'd he faint? Fei Xing, having heard of Xiao Qie's arrival, was worried that Xiao Qie would also catch a whiff of the odor when he entered. After all, the person sitting here was Shun Zichuan. He could not afford to shoulder the responsibility should something happen to Shun Zichuan due to the stench. Yin Chong had fought a winning battle, so everyone would not blame the old man for sure. That meant that they could only settle the score with him, old Fei the 10th. It couldn't be helped. Who asked him to be the attendant officer? Everyone around them was close to getting overwhelmed by the stench. This was truly too gross an injustice for Fei Xing. And so, he simply went the whole hog and made the first move to collapse and play dead before Shun Zichuan. Shun Zichuan immediately lifted his folding fan and put on the impressive air of a commander commanding his magnificent army. With calm and composure, he said, "Hurry, help him to the side hall and call for the physician to take a look at him. Elder Yin must be tired after the journey. Qingfeng, send someone to prepare warm water for Elder Yin. Once Elder Yin has bathed and rested, we can start the banquet." The moment Yin Chong heard the mention of a bath, he just about jumped in alarm. "Your lordship, I don't," Xiao Qie called out from outside. "Xiao Tianyao." "Got it." Xiao Tianyao bent to enter and simply hoisted Yin Chong over his shoulder. As the old man struggled, he laughed. "Elder Yin, Happy New Year. Time for a bath now." The gentlemen in the hall were so relieved that they did not even need Shun Zichuan to say the word before they hurriedly stood up to open the windows. The rush of cool breeze across their faces felt so refreshing that everyone sucked in a deep breath all at the same time. Chapter 200, Banquet. Chapter 200, Banquet. No one could have expected it to take Yin Chong nearly 4 hours to take a bath. All the gentlemen in the study waited until they were famished. Yu Xiaozai glanced at the snacks on the table, his stomach growling incessantly. "Yu Jing." Shun Zichuan extracted himself from Xizhou's affairs and said, "Dunzhou will serve as the supply camp when we mobilize troops to Duanzhou in the 2nd month. Tantai who doesn't have a clue about the workings of the yamen, so you will still have to go over and keep an eye on things. I'll give you the authority to undertake inspection tours. If anything crops up, you can report directly to my desk without the need to go through the relay stations." Yu Xiaozai was a chief surveillance bureau censor who could be considered a student of Tsinyu. In his early years, he had served as a touring censor and often carried out fieldwork in local areas. As such, he was very familiar with the ins and outs of the yamen. They were now establishing Dunzhou anew, and the key functionaries assigned over were newcomers selected by Xizhou. Using them did not feel all that reassuring. Shun Zichuan did not retain Yu Xiaozai in Dunzhou as the investigating circuit. Instead, he gave him the authority to conduct inspection tours and report directly back to him. Although Yu Xiaozai still did not have a definite official post, he carried a lot of weight. This was equivalent to the current surveillance commissioner in Zhongbua, who held sway over the various prefectures and circuits' local administration assessments. Yu Xiaozai hurriedly retracted his gaze from the snacks and rose to bow to Shun Zichuan. "It hasn't been long since Dunzhou was newly established," Xiao Qie said to Yu Xiaozai as he sat beside Shun Zichuan. As someone in a military post, Tantai who should not be interfering with the affairs of the yamen, but manpower is lacking in the various prefectures, so we are doing away with the taboos for now. He's a tad obtuse in this area, so he will need you to advise him as much as you can when it comes to the major issues." Tantai, who was a trusted subordinate of Xiao Qie, delegating him to a lower position in Dunzhou was because they needed him to fill in the vacant post of general in Zhongbua. Getting him to guard Dunzhou could actually be considered as doing him an injustice, but with this layer of connection, No one in the Dunjo Yamen dared to defy Tantai who, by saying what he had, Xiao Qia was actually backing Yu Xiaozai. Now that Yu Xiaozai had an appointment from Shun Zichuan to conduct inspections tours and make direct reports in addition to Xiao Qia's words, he no longer had anyone to fear when he made his rounds in Dunjo. It would also help his cause when he headed down to the other prefectures in the future. Yu Xiaozai was practically radiating with delight, but it would not do for him to be standing here and wear his heart too much on his sleeve, so he held his joy in check and bowed again to both of them. This humble subject will definitely do my best to live up to the prefectural lord and the second master's kindness. Yu Xiaozai's answer was loud and clear, but so was the response from his tummy too. Their duet was so resounding that the study was stunned into silence. It's the celebratory banquet for the garrison troops tonight. Shun Zichuan saw it was already getting dark. So I shall not hold you gentlemen back. Let's start the feast. The feast was set up in the side hall. Initially, Shun Zichuan was supposed to be in the host seat, but Xiao Qia was back now, and Yin Chang had still yet to show up, so he simply sat for a while as a gesture of appreciation before he took his leave. Most of those present were the advisors, and they did not dare to drink and let themselves go in Shun Zichuan's presence. With the prefectural lord gone for the night, they were a little more at ease. Qiao Tianyao was not around, and with no one keeping an eye on him, Yao Wenyu, unable to turn down the warm invitations of the various advisors to drink up, took a few cups too. Seeing him in a rare moment of relaxation, Qiao Tianyao did not stride across the door but let down the hanging screen at the door and accompanied him under the eaves instead. Having found Qiao Tianyao, Fei Xing beckoned to him from afar and said across the fine snow, "Let's go. What are you standing here like a pole for? There's a table set up in the duty room too. Everyone's waiting for you." Qiao Tianyao did not move. He looked a little unrestrained as he leaned against the doorpost. "Has everything been arranged on Master's end?" "Of course, they have to be." Fei Xing walked over to Qiao Tianyao and looked through the gap in the hanging screen. "The various gentlemen tend to break up late, so you can still make it on time when you come around later. Besides, there are guards both on the inside and outside. Nothing bad will happen." Qiao Tianyao thought for a moment and lifted the screen. Yao Wenyu looked over from the other side, as if he knew someone was here waiting. After a short pause, Qiao Tianyao lowered the screen and said, "I still have a few jars of fine wine in my room. You can send someone to get them. Consider it a token of my apology to everyone." Fei Xing stood still at the side for a moment before he merely said, "Who cares about those few jars of yours? How boring. Master has already released us from duty today, and yet you still keep yourself here." Having drunk a little, he was much more talkative than he usually was. "Master gave me the assignment to recruit newcomers a few days back. Do you know about it?" Qiao Tianyao folded his arms and sized Fei Xing up with his eyes. "Yeah." Fei Xing raised a finger to point at himself before pointing at Qiao Tianyao. Holding in a burp, he said, "Let me say a word in all honesty. We'll be building a cavalry in Duanzhou in the future. Master favors you the most, since you're pretty good at fighting after all. But look at you now, how did you come to this? You follow Yao Wenyu around as though you have forgotten where your roots are. If you go on like this, you will ruin your own future, sooner or later." Snow fell onto the hilt of Qiao Tianyao's blade. He looked at the courtyard and said absent-mindedly, "This is where my future lies. You're worrying too much. The Grand Mentor gave you to Master." Fei Xing lowered his voice, disappointed with him for not living up to expectations. "The day Master took you in, he also received Yang Shan Shui. Qiao Tianyao once swore to be Shun Zichuan's blade. Courage, insight, temperament, skills, he did not lack them all. Had he been willing, he could have been the kind of guard in Zhongbua like Zhao Hui and Chen Yang were. His future would be bright, with boundless prospects, and restoring his clan to its former glory would not be just a dream. But ever since he was assigned to Yao Wenyu's side, he had lost that desire. The task Shen Zichuan had handed over to Fei Xing to recruit new soldiers and accompany Yin Chang's troops to Fanzhou as the attendant officer were all assignments Qiao Tianya did not want. Qiao Tianya blew away the snowflakes drifting towards him and watched as the wind instantaneously swept them away into the pitch-black night, where they disappeared. He did not brush away the snow on his blade, nor did he answer Fei Xing. Xiao Qia removed his armor and wore just a single piece of unlined garment as he read Fei Xing's report, which included the details of the deployment of troops to Fanzhou. To think King Yi could even get his hands on firearms. His capability is astounding. 135 pieces. Shen Zichuan shed off his wide-sleeved robe. They all come from the Chunquan battalion, and there are even numbers from the Ministry of War engraved on them. He's just a mere mountain bandit without a proper army. Xiao Qia set his arms on the chair handles and watched as Shen Zichuan undressed. Who supplied him with such valuable stuff? Shen Zichuan's robe slid across the crooks of his arms and fell to the woolen rug. His regular wear had pearl clasps, which made subtle pop sounds as he flicked them open. That fair, smooth nape of his promptly materialized. Shen Zichuan covered it partially with his fingers, looking as though he was considering something. He was so unguarded in this slack moment it was as if he would not resist even if he were to be pinned down onto the rug, and with his mind preoccupied with other matters, he appeared all the more seductive. It does not benefit Kudu in any way for the firearms to be on the loose out there. It must have been stolen. Shen Zichuan's Adam's apple would bob when he was speaking. Xiao Qia gazed at it without so much a change in expression. He was exceedingly familiar with it. Each time Shen Zichuan dripped with perspiration, he had the habit of tilting his head up and exposing his neck. This was because Xiao Qia was too tall. Even if Shen Zichuan was lying on the bedding, he still had to meet Xiao Qia's kisses in such a way. Xiao Qia conjured up many scenes in his mind, but his expression was so composed and collected that he betrayed nothing of what he was thinking. His thumb was subconsciously caressing his thumb ring, rotating it gently. "Did Yin Chang bring back a captive?" he asked. "King Yi's male lover with the surname Hua. Qingfeng said that he's the son of Hua Qing, the former commander-in-chief of Dengzhou." Having spoken to this point, Shen Zichuan looked at Xiao Qia. "We can take a look at him tomorrow morning. This person used firearms to scare Yin Chang into retreating," Xiao Qia said. "Looks like he knows how to use it. Someone must have taught him." Shen Zichuan undid the last of the pearl clasp, and when he released his hand, his regular wear slid to the ground. The beauty, finally comfortable now, kicked off the wooden clogs on his feet in passing. With his back to the dim light and narrow waist revealed, he was like the personification of gorgeousness who could not be contained by his clothes. Xiao Qia tasted secret pleasure. This was just like foreplay between the two of them not privy to others. His desire for Lanzhou gradually crept into his chest, filling it up. "Send a few pieces of firearms to Li Bei tomorrow morning. The military craftsman can draw up a blueprint." Harigu learned Yin Chang's formation on the sly back at the Beiyuan military drill grounds, and I couldn't counter his moves. When we mobilize troops to Duanzhou this time, I want Yin Chang to follow along. Xiao Qia tossed Fei Xing's report on the desk. Shen Zichuan, who was holding up the tea to take a sip, glanced at Xiao Qia on hearing him and asked meaningfully, "Are you not taking me along?" "Sure," Xiao Qia said frivolously as he faced Shen Zichuan. "There's a ferocious tiger too back at home who usually keeps a tight watch on me, so I can only get up to some hanky-panky with you while the troops are on the march." Wickedness twinkled at the corners of Shen Zichuan's upturned eyes. "Your wife is so fierce. I'm scared." Xiao Qia imitated Shen Zichuan's tone the last time. "I'm fierce too." "I'm not afraid of you being fierce." Shen Zichuan held up and pressed the folding fan between their lips. "Like a fox from outside," he said, "but you only come over once in a blue moon." Xiao Qia tilted his head slightly. "What can I do? I'm but a henpecked husband who fears my wife. If it were me, Shen Zichuan shifted away his folding fan and leaned close to Xiao Qia's lips, where he softly said, I'll stay at home all day longing for you, making love to you under the sheets, stirring up a storm with you. Xiao Qia kissed Shen Zichuan, breaking up those shameless words of his. He felt his way down, but did not find Shen Zichuan's tail. The light in the room dimmed a little, and the hanging drapes of the bed had long been let down. There was clearly no one else around, yet they both seemed to be having a clandestine affair. Both men rubbed up against the other, suppressing their gasps for breath. I want all of you, Xiao Qia whispered. Shen Zichuan was bitten to the point of tears. The side of his face chafed against the bedding. Under Xiao Qia's gaze, he strained himself to look at Xiao Qia with wet, glistening eyes and said in a fit of pique, You greedy cad. Xiao Qia had spent nearly 2 months on the battlefields, and when he returned to Cizhou, he stayed over at the Beiyuan military drill grounds as he pinched Shen Zichuan's chin now. He stared at him and whispered with a smile, You're absolutely right. Shen Zichuan was taken, possessed by Xiao Qia. After so long a time, it felt completely different this time. The change in Xiao Qia was exhibited on full display right here. He no longer let Shen Zichuan off. The feeling of being invaded and possessed from bottom to top gave Shen Zichuan the sensation that he had completely fallen. He was now Xiao Qia's captive. His heartbeats, his voice, his breath. Xiao Qia wanted all of Shen Zichuan, even as he dominated him. Shen Zichuan could not endure it anymore. Sweat and tears interweaved. He could barely catch his breath now. Xiao Qia even had to seize away tears he had yet to shed. Xiao Qia once wanted the sky, the grasslands, and also the Hongyan mountains. He domesticated eagles and tamed horses, and he galloped among the vast lands in the dreams. But in the end, he no longer wanted them all. He wanted Shen Zichuan. Shen Zichuan began to cry. He raised his head, his expressive eyes glistening with waves of emotions. At the peak of his euphoria, he slurred. Yi Xiao Qia thought he was afraid. But Shen Zichuan lifted his chin slightly. His face flushed as he licked his lips wet. Oh, how I love you so! These words were both his madness and his solace, either of which could easily vanquish Xiao Qia. The temptation that glistened in this pair of eyes was so much like that day in Dunzhou, when he had leaped from Fuxian Peak into Xiao Qia's arms. The expressions in those eyes were just as equally crazed. Even without the blistering wind and raging fire, he was bad to the bone. For this, Xiao Qia had feigned anger. At the same time, he was extraordinarily delighted. He had in his bosom the one and only Shun Lanzhao in the world. Xiao Qia bent down to kiss Shen Zichuan, as though he was shackling him. He did not want Shen Zichuan to leave him by even half an inch amidst the jolts, nor did he want Shen Zichuan to break free of his hold amidst the gasps for breath. Every thrust went in deeper and harder, never lighter, making the bedding damp, and making Shen Zichuan tremble. They went wild with abandon in the dimness, their sweats merging together into an expanse of dampness. There was nothing left but each other. The damp night stirred among the dappled shadows of the trees, and the bamboo blinds came to a silent rest. There was no one waiting in attendance on the veranda, so the whispered confidence in the room remained concealed within the hanging drapes. Bamboo tubes in the courtyard tilted, discharging cool water among the snowflakes and scouring over the frozen moss. Meng folded its wings and rested on the beam in the hallway. It tilted its head to listen for a moment, then tilted its head back into place and closed its eyes to sleep. Occasionally, the caws of a jackdaw rang out, but even that could not disturb the pair of lovers deep in the throes of their passion. Yao Wenyu pillowed his head on Qiao Tianya's back. With some difficulty, he opened his eyes and looked at the overcast sky. The stars are right within reach. 3. Rest up, Qiao Tianya said. There are no stars tonight. Light snow of the night caressed his face. Yao Wenyu reached out and grabbed at the empty air. The blend of the smell of wine on him and the aroma of medicine puffed onto the side of Qiao Tianya's ear as he suddenly spoke. What are you all red for? Xiao Tianya did not answer. What are you all hot for? Xiao Tianya still did not answer. Yao Wenyu bowed his head down and buried his face into the back of Xiao Tianya's shoulder. He mumbled, "What good is of talent to me? Getting nowhere with these legs of mine, as unclear as the path ahead lies, for with no lofty aspirations to speak of, a blessed man I am not." Xiao Tianya stepped across the thin snow with the soles of his boots making soft squeaking sounds. Yao Wenyu clapped his palm together in tandem with the sound of snow and murmured, "Since time immemorial, dead are the sages and men of virtues, only the reputation of the drinkers endures." 5 Xiao Tianya felt his own nape getting wet. He knew that was not the snow melting, but even so, he said, "The snow's getting in. Block it out for me, will you?" Footnotes: Touring Censor, a duty assignment for investigating censors twice a year to tour and inspect governmental operations in the various regions and to provide data for consideration in the promotion and demotion of local officials. Xiao Qie used here. Back at home usually refer to a man's wife who is a tigress or a shrew. A line from a poem, Lodging for a Night at a Mountain Temple, by Li Bai. Since this whole line seemed to us like it has multiple layers of meaning, we just going to footnote them here. A modification of, or everyone has his own heaven-endowed talent, so in this vein, the line can be read as, "What good is of talent to me?" Although another way of reading this line, albeit more literally, is, "Why am I born? What is the meaning of my existence?" First part can be translated as "can't walk" or "getting nowhere," while the typical translation for, as in, refer to "can't explain oneself clear." Personally, though, could also refer to the philosophical way Yao Wenyu was talking about in an earlier chapter, especially in relation to the earlier "getting nowhere" phrase, i.e., feeling lost about his way in life. A modification from the line from the poem Chong Jin Jiu, by Li Bai. Chapter 201. Intense Desire. Chapter 201. Intense desire. Shen Zichuan could not get up. The inside of his thighs were all covered with teeth marks. He slept with Xiao Qie on top of him, pinning him down, until the third quarter of the hour of Si. When Fei Xing came to call him, Shen Zichuan had still yet to wake. Xiao Qie lowered his head to kiss him from behind, his kisses so intense that Shen Zichuan near about gave up the ghost. "Please spare me." Shen Zichuan strained himself to struggle before he eventually sprawled back onto the bedding. He narrowed his eyes and said to Xiao Qie in a hoarse voice, "Mind's in a whirl, can't think at all." Shen Zichuan was red everywhere. There were the bite marks, and then there were the pinch marks. His nape was the most piteous of all, having borne the brunt of it. Xiao Qie's chest pressed against him, making him so hot that he was sweating. The most intense of all last night had been sitting in an embrace, in Xiao Qie's arms, with the crooks of his legs held down in place, and all he could do was to lean against Xiao Qie's chest. Amidst the jolts and thrusts, Shen Zichuan forgot all about the part about it being a clandestine affair as he cried out "Yi" and "Suan" repeatedly until he came, even wetting the bedding under him later as he lay prone on the pillow. He could not remember how many rounds they had gone through, only that his tears had run out. Towards the end, he was all dazed and dizzy, but Xiao Qie was still not done. He continued to thrust into Shen Zichuan, making him moan softly like he was begging for mercy. The way his moans trailed off tantalized Xiao Qie right in the heart, causing such an insatiable itch that Xiao Qie was stirred into biting him yet again. Poor thing! Xiao Qie clung close to him and whispered, "I'll hold you up." Yin Chang got up early today and waited at the foot of the veranda to seek an audience with the prefectural lord. Fei Xing saw the old man looking utterly uncomfortable as he glanced left and right. Fearing that he might make a fool of himself later, he said, "You've already met him yesterday. Why are you still nervous?" The icicles on the eaves had been knocked off to reveal just how distinguished the man in the room was. Yin Chang's feet were a little numb. He tugged at his sleeves and said, "I feel uncomfortable everywhere." They rubbed me so hard with such big bars of soap when giving me a bath yesterday that my skin's about to get all wrinkly." On hearing this, Fei Xing wanted to laugh. 7 or 8 young male servants were sent to attend to Yin Chang yesterday. They bathed him for a full 4 hours, and even changed out several big tubs of hot water. It was only in the middle of the night, when everyone left the banquet, that the old man made his escape, holding up the legs of his pants as he ran while evading the servants. "Bathing is good," Fei Xing said. "You look spirited. I think you look just like my elder brother today. Don't fucking lie to me." Yin Chang did not have a good night's sleep. He murmured to Fei Xing, "You lad, have a glib tongue." Having said that, he looked around furtively again. "Is the second master in the room too?" Fei Xing replied. "He rushed back just to meet you." "Then can I go to Li Bei?" Yin Chang hurriedly asked. "I'd like to meet General Liu." Fei Xing was in a predicament. He did not know how to reply to him. Yin Chang's desire to see Liu Guangbai was only to be expected. That formation of his was adapted from the Bianjuan commandery garrison troops, but Li Bei was fighting a war at present, and the areas along the Chaosha River were unstable, so how could Yin Chang run around as he pleased? As he was thinking about it, there were movements on the other side. "Let's see his lordship first," Fei Xing said. "We'll talk about it again after meeting him." A window was opened from inside to ventilate the room. The weather was not considered cold today, but Shun Zichuan was especially sensitive to the chill, so he layered up with a coat. During the journey back, Fei Xing had checked up on Huo Lingyun's background and reported it all in its entirety to Shun Zichuan, regardless of significance. Shun Zichuan did not have the time to read it before sleeping the night before, so he looked through it carefully now. The firearms seized by Fei Xing were handed over by Huo Lingyun himself. Shun Zichuan turned the folding fan between his fingers around and rested it on the side of his hand. "This person is interesting. I do have to meet him." All that separated Xiao Qie from Shun Zichuan was a small table. With his arm propped up, Xiao Qie looked a little playful, but the expression in his eyes was wicked. Just a glance over was an invasion. His eyes swept back and forth between the words, "male lover," "bitten to death," and "arson." He said, "He's a tough nut." If Huo Lingyun had not thrown a monkey wrench into their plans with the firearms, Yin Chang would have been able to take down Fanzhou during his first battle. He would not have given Shun Zichuan the opportunity to even tell him to bring his own head on a platter to meet him. Afterward, Yin Chang employed the use of verbal provocation to launch an attack on the city, thereby stepping onto the battlefield for real this time. But Huo Lingyun's acts of arson diminished the battle in Fanzhou. With merits and demerits offsetting the other, Yin Chang's reward was once again reduced by half. Perhaps Huo Lingyun genuinely wanted to throw in his lot with Shun Zichuan, but he did not use the most optimal strategy. Instead, he fought a battle with firearms with the intent of letting Shun Zichuan know he was useful and even more valuable than the current commanding general of Cizhou. People who climbed their way to the top by trampling over others were all tough nuts to crack. Yao Wenyu was the first to enter while they were in the middle of their conversation. Kong Ling followed behind him, pushing his wheelchair, and finally, Yu Xiaozai stepped through. The various gentlemen bowed to Shun Zichuan, who prompted them to take a seat. "It's so cold," Shun Zichuan said to Yao Wenyu. "You should have asked Qiao Tianya to come over and drop me a note, and I would have shifted the meeting venue to your courtyard so that you wouldn't have to make the trip." Yao Wenyu did not sleep well the night before, and his eyes were slightly bloodshot. He had even brought his cat along today. "It's just a stone's throw away. There's no need to go to the extent of having your lordship put everyone to the trouble. I saw Elder Yin and Fei Xing both waiting at the foot of the veranda. Will you let them in for an audience now?" "Let them in," Shun Zichuan said. "I've kept Elder Yin waiting for almost an hour." Fei Xing led Yin Chang in to pay their obeisances to Shun Zichuan and Xiao Qi. No matter how worried he was about Yin Chang, he did not dare to glance over at this moment, lest the master noticed. Xiao Qia looked at Yin Chang and asked, "Did Elder Yin sleep well last night?" This was the first time Yin Chang was meeting Xiao Qia. He had not taken a good look yesterday, but now that he had a closer look, holy moly, he thought to himself, isn't this second master way too tall? His legs as he sat on the couch were almost as long as two of him. Yin Chang tensed up again. Wringing the hem of his clothes, he vaguely answered, not too bad. Elder Yin, take a seat too. Shen Zichuan was aware that Xiao Qia was an imposing presence, and he did not come across as an easy one to get along with. Thus, he spoke to Yin Chang gently, "We will be discussing some military affairs with the various gentlemen today. With the troops soon to be deployed to Duanzhou, Fanzhou cannot be left unattended. Based on the report, Huolingyun is inextricably tied to this battle at Fanzhou. Kong Ling was familiar with Dengzhou. He could be considered to have come from a military family. His father was Hu Qing, the commander-in-chief of Dengzhou, who repelled the bandits in the territory during the 6th year of Xianda. The feud with Yang Qiu and the rest of Dengzhou's bandits was probably formed during that time. I have some impression of Hu Qing." Yu Xiaozai picked up the thread of conversation after taking his seat. During the suppression of bandits in the 6th year of the reign of Xianda, he submitted a memorial that could be considered a report of victory to the Ministry of War. However, in the next few years, the prefectural prefect of Dengzhou impeached him for being a headstrong and conceited commander who resorted to arms without due consideration, which in turn caused the bandits in the territory to seek revenge on the commoners, subsequently plunging Dengzhou into extreme misery. The Ministry of War deliberated over and over again before they finally did away with the notion to promote him. Shen Zichuan got Fei Xing to stand up as he addressed the gentleman. The local governments are a mixed bag. From the time the two factions of Pan and Hua took over control of state power, the impeachments that came from the lower levels were a mess, with the majority of them arising from personal grudges. The procedures in which the cases were handled during the reign of Xianda can't be counted as valid, so this Hu Qing might not necessarily be a headstrong and conceited person. Shen Zichuan was right. Apart from the reason for his dislike for Emperor Xianda, it was true that both factions were as irreconcilable as ice and fire when they were in power. At that time, Kudu depended on side-taking to distinguish between enemy and ally, and the dividing line in the local governments was even rigid. So a conclusion on whether Hu Qing's impeachment was legitimate could not be made based on just those few memorials. Hu Qing is Hu Qing. Huolingyun is Huolingyun. Xiao Qia had now drawn a clear distinction between father and son. You people were the ones who detained him and escorted him back. What did you think of him during the journey? Yin Chang was an honest man with a one-track mind. Fei Xing did not let the old man speak, but he could tell from Xiao Qia's words that the second master did not like this Huolingyun. He did not like Huolingyun either. Fei Xing served Shen Zichuan, and he had plenty of opportunities to render meritorious service in the future when they established a light cavalry, but Yin Chang might not necessarily have the chance. The old man's hair and beard were all white now, and he only got to battle this one time after waiting several years. But then, a male consort appeared out of nowhere and took most of the old man's credit with that bit of dirty, underhanded tricks of his. Fei Xing was displeased deep down, but his expression was natural as he said, "For the sake of revenge, this person could endure great hardships and steel himself to achieve his goals. He sure is something, and I respect him as a man." But when I arrived at the Fanzhou's yamen, I saw the furs of the mastiffs King Yi reared all glossy. Only when I asked around that I found out Huolingyun had fed King Yi and Suiqing to the dogs. Since he has a feud with King Yi, why didn't he communicate with us earlier? By bringing up Huolingyun's feeding of people to the dogs at this point in time, he was tactfully telling Shen Zichuan in a roundabout way that it was hard for this person to be of great use. Contrary to Fei Xing's expectations, Shen Zichuan did not go along with it. Instead, he said after a moment's pause, "Since everyone is here now, call him over." Huo Lingyun had been in the cell for 2 days, and the wardens who delivered his meals to him never spoke to him. Fei Xing took special care of him and tampered with his fetters and shackles so that it was much heavier than the usual ones the others used. But he hardly moved around and merely remained in the same spot, as though he had countless never-ending thoughts on his mind. Huo Lingyun stepped into the courtyard, and Gu Jin sensed something amiss from the sound. With Ding Tao and Li Xiong in tow, he watched from under the eaves as Huo Lingyun walked past. So heavy! Li Xiong pointed at Huo Lingyun's feet and said to Ding Tao, "It's the set of chains I wore. Seems to me he can move freely." Ding Tao told on Huo Lingyun to Gu Jin. "Jin Ji, he's trained in martial arts." He was far from just trained. Gu Jin lifted a finger and motioned to the guards hidden in the courtyard to be on the alert. He patted Ding Tao and Li Xiong on their backs and pushed the 2 children to a side, while he stood by the hanging screen himself and signaled to Qiao Tianya, who was on the other end, with his eyes. Qiao Tianya turned his head aside to stare at Huo Lingyun's back. In a deep voice he said, "He's a rather formidable one." Shen Zichuan did not size Huo Lingyun up. However, Huo Lingyun did not shy away from sizing up Shen Zichuan first. The prefectural lord was 22 years of age this year. He was a beautiful one, with the upturns of the corners of his eyes just perfect. Any higher, and they would give him a come-hither look. Even so, they looked like they were swimming in emotions at a quick glance. Yet, he was extraordinarily cool and detached. His gaze, when he did look over, was chilling. He was an unfathomable, bottomless pit that looked all the more dangerous the longer you laid eyes on him. Huo Lingyun did not know if it was because Shen Zichuan had been in a top-dog position for a long time, but Shen Zichuan had an overpowering air to him when he did not speak. Not the kind that came assaulting head-on in the face, but the kind that gradually grew ice-cold as it crept along your limbs to your heart. This was Shen Zichuan. Since Shen Zichuan did not open his mouth, the gentlemen present did not dare to speak. Silence momentarily reigned in the room, making Huo Lingyun appear undaunted instead. Xiao Qia nudged his thumb ring. His posture remained unchanged, but his imposing aura was like a kick dealt to Huo Lingyun's face. He looked askance at Huo Lingyun with an air so oppressive that the other man almost could not lift his head. Shen Zichuan was the precious jade Xiao Qia held between his fangs. Any sort of prying eyes must die before they ever get within a few steps of Shen Zichuan. This was an affront to Xiao Qia, and he was now offended, even if the other party was perhaps only looking out of curiosity. The gentlemen in the room could hear nothing amiss, but they could sense that the second master was not very happy now. Very subtly, the atmosphere began to grow heavy, so much that it crushed down on their chests for no rhyme or reason, suffocating them until they could not take deep breaths. Your confession statements leave out the details. It was only at this moment Shen Zichuan looked at Huo Lingyun. You reported the firearms, but you didn't explain their origins. It's most pointless to say things halfway. As someone who had traversed both the overland and water routes, one Huo Lingyun could figure out a little something from the expression in Xiao Qia's eyes. He retracted his gaze, and the shackles on his hands clanged. Naturally, there are many matters that can only be discussed when I've seen the prefectural lord, he said with a calm expression. If what you say makes me unhappy, Shen Zichuan said with cool detachment, there can only be one outcome whether or not you get to see me. There will be the scorpions in addition to the Biancha cavalry in Duanzhou during Cizhou's use of military forces in the second month. Huo Lingyun looked towards Xiao Qia without so much a trace of fear. Without Xiao Fangxiu, can the Libei armored cavalry still make it? The break in the thumb ring stopped between the pulps of the fingers. Xiao Qia finally moved. Very slowly, he leaned over, and his shadow enveloped Huo Lingyun from top to bottom, forming a trail of a phantom wolf with an injured eye across the ground. Fei Xing, who was standing at the side, swiftly dropped to one knee on the ground and lowered his head without uttering a sound. Beside him, Yin Chang felt the pricks of fear running down his back. With his heart thumping, The old man almost slid to the ground as he kneeled after Fei Xing. Dead silence descended, inside and outside. Xiao Qie was angry. Chapter 202. Connecting the Dots. Chapter 202. Connecting the dots. Huolingyun had seen wolves before. In the wilderness of Dengzhou, those wolves that were all skin and bones had their tails between their legs as they ran on King Yi's hunting grounds, their eyes glowing with ravenous hunger. But at this moment, the wolf he was seeing was one that hailed from Li Bei. Not only did this wolf possess a strong physique, but it also had an aura so oppressively intimidating that he gripped his chains tight. Even the muscles on his back had tensed up with tension. Huolingyun must not gasp for air, because if he opened his mouth again, Xiao Qie would throttle him and snap his throat. Xiao Qie completely dominated the atmosphere around him as he remained kneeling in place. It conjured the illusion of being pinned down by the back of his head. Xiao Qie wanted Huolingyun on his knees, with his head down. Huolingyun broke out in a sweat as he simmered in that unending silence. He did not want to compromise, but by the time he returned to his senses, he had already averted his gaze and bowed his head. Since that bout of heavy snowfall, the Li Bei armored cavalry had never won again. The battles they were fighting on the battlegrounds at present all proved to be aggravating. Gone were the days when the armored cavalry reigned over the battlefield. Huolingyun initially planned to crush Xiao Qie's spirit and level the playing field for both parties during the negotiations. Yet he had run right smack into an iron plate and was now being held down to the ground by Xiao Qie instead. Xiao Qie's shadow did not shift. His lowered gaze locked on to the back of Huolingyun's head as he repeated with cold detachment, "Can it?" Huolingyun clenched his teeth as he deflated and swallowed down his indignation. To think he had gotten afraid. Xiao Qie was completely poles apart from Sun Sichuan. He would not feign civility at certain moments, instead, he would dominate and dictate. He would hold down the heads of all of those who provoked him and offer them only one way out. The imperial army in its earlier days knew this very well from experience. Sun Sichuan covered the teacup with the lid and tapped his fingers against it intermittently. He possessed the ability to warm up the atmosphere after a cold spell, and through this subtle action, he curiously unraveled the tension in the hall, allowing Fei Xing, who was still kneeling, to resume breathing. Outside the door, Gu Jin exhaled lightly and released his grip on the hilt of his blade. It was only until Huolingyun's entire back was drenched in sweat that the shadow enveloping him pulled back. Xiao Qie did not withdraw his gaze. He merely leaned back into his comfort zone, as though he had lost interest in the Huolingyun who had his head down. It was at this moment Sun Sichuan opened up the lid and said in between sips of tea, "You're very well acquainted with the situation in Duanzhou." These two men took over from one another seamlessly, yet they both exuded a dangerous aura. Huolingyun's palms were all sweaty. He retracted his contempt, all the more certain that he had been right in his decision to come. The scorpions came looking for King Yi before. Huolingyun decided to show his sincerity. During the 12th month last year, he instigated King Yi to ambush Chazhou and cut off your contact with Qidong. To that end, he gifted King Yi with a shipment of firearms. In a flash, both Sun Sichuan and Xiao Qie thought of the white scorpions. These Biantia spies concealed themselves deep in Dazhou, collaborating with Amur from within and without to pierce through the heart of Dazhou. The 12th month of the previous year was the turning point when the Li Bei armored cavalry switched from offensive to defensive. Had King Yi been gutsy enough to launch a surprise attack on Chazhou at the Scorpion's instigation, Sun Sichuan would undoubtedly be held in check by this diversion and reduced his aid to Li Bei. Additionally, they only had to cut off the route to Chazhou, and Qi Juin would have to make a detour from the eastern side of Tianfei Watchtower to head up north, where she was bound to pass through the territory of Fanzhou. With the scorpions lying in ambush en route, the Commander-in-Chief's life would be in peril. They're keeping a close watch on Commander-in-Chief Qi. Sun Sichuan looked at Xiao Qie, the expression in his eyes conveying all the words he left unspoken. Hassan's encirclement of Xiao Fengshu to kill him was not only to deal a blow to Li Bei, but also to capitalize on the opportunity to lure out Qi Juin. As expected, Amur knew Dezhou like the back of his hand. But King Yi didn't make his move. He was most willing to remain in Fanzhou like a cowering coward, and then he had his head blown off by you with a gun. Xiao Qia's words were scathing. So, did the scorpions come looking for you? Huo Lingyun stared at both his knees. No. You're lying. Shen Zichuan skimmed the tea foam and raised his eyes to say with certainty through that willowy spiral of steam, "You've had contact with the scorpions before." When Shen Zichuan was in the imperial bodyguards, he successively served as the southern and northern judge, and the amount of time he had spent in the imperial prison was not exactly short. He naturally had his own means of interrogating people, just like how he had once tricked Ji Lei and Shi Hongxian through his conversations with them. He was adept at using environments to manipulate the atmosphere. Sometimes, one had to keep their words short without revealing more than necessary, and the other party would naturally let his thoughts run wild. Huo Lingyun had to remain clear-headed. If he so much as gave a wrong answer again as he kneeled here, he might end up literally losing his head. He held up against the pressure from both men and exhaled deeply, as if exhorting himself to remain calm. He was already at a dead end, and the worst that could happen was happening now. Thus, when he lifted his head once again, he regained some of his composure. "That's right," Huo Lingyun said. "I've had contact with the scorpions long before King Yi. My father fought a winning battle during the 6th year of Xianda, and he dispatched someone over to persuade my father to give up Fanzhou. He also promised my father a noble title, but my father turned him down." Shen Zichuan inclined his head slightly, concealing the lingering redness at the corners of his eyes under the slanting, backlit shadows. "You said he, not they." Huo Lingyun recalled the night a few years ago, when the horse carriage from Kudu brought along a valuable letter of significance. Huo Qing stood by the candlelight and opened it, where he touched the heavy promise within. If the Bianjuan Commandery was the most wretched station for troops in Qidong, then Dengzhou was the poorest prefecture of Zhonghua. These two places were similarly poor. Dengzhou's one and only advantage was that it did not have to face the onslaught of attacks from the Biancha cavalry all the time like the Bianjuan Commandery had to. After the Zhonghua's troops' defeat, the rampant banditry put Huo Qing in a terrible fix, and he remained stranded in this corner, unable to get any assistance from the imperial court. That letter was the last chance Huo Qing had to get out of his predicament, but he did not take it and ended up as dinner in the dogs' bellies. "Yes, he." Huo Lingyun enunciated the word through clenched teeth. "This man is hiding right in Kudu, and he's by no means an ordinary person if he can make such a promise. After my father refused the bribe, he was impeached by that Peng dog. Consequently, the Ministry of War refused to promote my father. They believed that cursed Peng's one-sided lies and stopped giving Dengzhou the military funds it was due. That was when the Dengzhou bandits resurfaced. Yang Qiu went to Fanzhou and joined hands with Cuiqing to set up a brothel trade and got back into the business of selling women. He also took the opportunity to make contact with Lei Changming of Mount Luo. The dots were all connecting now. Shen Zichuan remembered his puzzlement when he was checking the Yen clan's accounts in Dunzhou. How did Biancha not leave any traces behind when they stole away such a large batch of resources from Dazhou? The reason was that they were not on the Dunzhou, Mount Luo and Duanzhou route at all. From start to end, Lei Changming and Lei Jinjia had merely been a smokescreen AMUer set up in the northeast of Zhonghua. No wonder Yen Heru was so sure about this. He had indeed never touched these goods before. However, he must have been in the know, because the merchants in his hands all had dealings with Cuiqing. Coupled with what Yu Xiaozai had said about Peng Fangmiao's impeachment of Huo Qing during the 6th year of Xianda, Shen Zichuan was even more certain of his guess. The goods were transported from Fanzhou. Shen Zichuan held the teacup in his hands. They sent the goods directly to the banks of Chasha River without even passing through Dunzhou. He initially wanted to use a noble title to bribe Huiqing into being a white scorpion and turn the Dengzhou garrison troops in Huiqing's hands into delivery escorts for the goods. After Huiqing turned him down, he sought out the prefectural prefect of Dengzhou, Peng Fangmiao, who accepted the bribe and subsequently started to impeach Huiqing vehemently. Yu Jing. Shen Zichuan suddenly asked Yu Xiaozai. Which year was Peng Fangmiao transferred down to Dengzhou? Before that, whose student was he? Yu Xiaozai racked his brain, but all he had to say was, I can't remember. Zhongbo was negligent in its administration after the 4th year of Xianda, and the prefectural prefects in Duanzhou, Dunzhou, Fanzhou, and Dengzhou changed frequently. All I can remember is the impeachment memorial. The officialdom was as vast as the sea, with innumerable key positions of varying importance just in Kudu alone. The trivial posts in the local governments were even more complex. Even without Kudu in the mix, it was impossible for Yu Xiaozai to remember all the various vice magistrates under the 13 cities of Jueshi, not to mention minute details such as the year the other party was transferred or the person they had received advice from. It had to be known that in Kudu, when someone sent in a visitation card to call on a powerful household in Kudu, all it took was for the head of the clan to be willing to see said person and exchange a few words, and said person could proclaim themselves as the other person's student the moment they stepped out of the door. They were also sure to address the other as teacher whenever they met. On top of that, the Hua and Pan factions had countless of lackeys after the reign of Xianda, when both factions plunged the imperial court into turmoil. Ding Tao, after a moment of silence, Shao Qie called out, Come in. Ding Tao anxiously stuck his head out. Frightened by Shao Qie's expression, he walked in with the same side of his arm and leg moving in tandem. Everyone in the hall looked towards Ding Tao. He opened his eyes wide, wanting to look at Shen Zichuan, but not daring to. Shao Qie was in no hurry. He shifted his arm slightly, then asked Ding Tao, Do you still remember the name Peng Fangmiao? Ding Tao shook his head blankly. Outside, Qiao Tianya had a sudden brainwave and piped up, Tao Zi, this person should be in the Ministry of Personnel's reference list after the 4th year of Xianda. Think again. Hua Xiqian, Wei Huaigu, or even Pan Rugi. During the 4th year of Xianda, when the Bianxia cavalry slaughtered the city, the people left in Dengzhou were Tantai Hu and the others, all of whom were taken into the imperial army by Shao Qie. The original prefectural prefect of Dengzhou had also died during that massacre, so Peng Fangmiao could only be a court official assigned over after the 4th year of Xianda. Other than his exemplary ability in writing, Ding Tao's memory was also rather astounding. His family's notebook was modeled after the record-taking of the imperial bodyguards, and Ding Tao had grown familiar with the procedure during the times he tagged along with his father. Back in Kudu, Qiao Tianya had once visited the residence of the Prince of Libei at night, but was turned away by Ding Tao and Gu Jin. Ding Tao could tell the origin of the concealed weapon he had tossed out at just a glance, a feat that Qiao Tianya still remembered to this day. Ding Tao fished out his little notebook, staying silent amidst the rustling of pages being flipped. At this sight, Yu Xiaozai also began to remember. Without realizing it, he spoke out, Our chief surveillance. Ding Tao's eyes abruptly lit up. He bookmarked a page. Chief Surveillance Bureau. That's right, the Chief Surveillance Bureau. Young master. Ding Tao looked toward Shen Zichuan as though he was seeking praise. The assassination case in Kudu. The Imperial Bodyguards and Chief Surveillance Bureau wanted to investigate master at that time. There was someone surnamed Fu. That's him. Fu Linia. Of course Shen Zichuan remembered the assassination case. He had sensed something amiss with the Quanqing silk while he was investigating that case. At that time, the person who had shirked responsibility for searching the Prince of Libei's residence and passed it on to him was the right censor-in-chief, Fu Linia. Yu Xiaozai suddenly slapped his thigh and even stood up. He was so miffed with himself he just had to laugh at the ludicrousness of it. Chortling himself silly with Ding Tao, he said, I remembered it now too. Your lordship, before the assassination case, everyone thought that Fu Linia was an official of humble origins. It was precisely because of Fu Linia that second master suffered so much back then. So that son of a bitch had long been colluding with Wei Huaigu. The tussle between the noble clans and those of humble origins happened after the 4th year of Xianda. Back then, Hua Xiqian led the Grand Secretariat, and he also had the help of the Empress Dowager and Pan Rugi. Hai Liangyi thus had no choice but to rely on the Chief Surveillance Bureau's evaluations of the various officials for promotion and delegation to hinder the minions of the Hua and Pan clans from running amok in the local region's governments. Fu Linia, who was at that time pretending to be a gentleman of worth, had considerable influence over Hai Liangyi and the other officials of humble origins' consideration of those on the Ministry of Personnel's reference list. If Fu Linia was the one who assigned Peng Fangmiao to Dengzhou, Shen Zichuan paused for a moment, then Wei Huaigu and even Shi Hongxian could be this he. Chapter 203, Songyu. Chapter 203, Songyu Huolingyun obviously did not know who exactly he was, or he would have been able to voice out the name the moment he opened his mouth. However, regardless of whether it was Wei Huaigu or Shi Hongxian, they were all already dead. During the 6th year of Xianda, only the Hua and Pan factions had the capability to make promises of noble titles to Huaqing. Yao Wenyu stroked the back of the cat's neck with 2 fingers. At that time, Shi Hongxian had yet to join the imperial court, and Wei Huaigu was far from having the ability to do so. Why did your lordship put your guess on these 2 people? Noble title. Xiao Qia stressed the 2 words. Trace this promise up the hierarchy, and you don't even need to guess to be able to list out the few who could do so. It's as good as not covering it up. Based on the speculation of Peng Fangmiao's official career afterward, the promise of a noble title is very likely a sort of disguise. The real bribe used was something else. Talking about the scorpions had made half of Kong Ling's body break out in a cold sweat. Although Qian Jin was the Minister of Revenue before the 8th year of Xianda, it was still Wei Huaigu who held genuine control over the Ministry of Revenue starting from the 1st year of Xianda. Qian Jin was dismissed from office along with Hua Xiqian during the rebellion at the Nanlin hunting ground. However, the key to Dazhou's money still did not fall into Hai Liangyi's hands. Wei Huaigu stepped forward immediately right after and took over the office of the Minister of Revenue, where he continued to go around in circles with Hai Liangyi. It was not until Wei Huaigu was imprisoned during the Li Bei's military provisions case that the noble clan's embezzlement of state treasury during the reign of Xianda, which resulted in a deficit that eventually led to the Zhongbua troops' defeat, finally surfaced. This was an intricate, complicated web that involved not only the officials from Kudu but even the officials of the various Dazhou local governments. Think about it. If he had used the same method to plant covert pawns and chess pieces in Jueshi and Qidong, then how many of them now were scorpions? It makes one's blood run cold, Kong Ling could not refrain from blurting out. This is simply corroding Dazhou from within. Panic not. Shen Zichuan looked around at the various gentlemen. The calm tone he used flicked away the anxiety that was beginning to permeate the air. It's all too easy to give themselves away when there are too many threads of clues. Even the most astute scheme is bound by the limitations of the mortal body. Manipulating such a game is time-consuming and labor-intensive, and having too many people involved will only prove to be counterproductive. After all, too many cooks spoil the broth. Jueshi and Qidong were both not the same as Zhongbua. Zhongbua was the result of a lax administration, while Jueshi had Jiang Qingshan who, during his investigation of the deficit with Shuexiuzhua, did everything in his power to thwart the noble clans and the scorpions. Meanwhile, Qidong had Qi Juin, the commander-in-chief, who was in charge of all the territories in Qidong. She had her own core team under her command, as well as Qi Xiu to assist her in governmental affairs. She would never collude with the scorpions. But Shen Zichuan was certain at this moment that the person who had tampered with the Bianjuan commandery's grains was a white scorpion hiding in Kudu, and this scorpion had not been trying to force Lu Guangbai into rebelling, but to drive him to his death. Shao Qia, however, once again fixed his eyes on Huo Lingyun. Since the scorpions were the ones who gave the firearms to King Yi, then who's the one who taught you to use it? Firearms were not broadswords and swords. As a native of Dengzhou, Huo Lingyun would not have had the chance to come into contact with them before this, so he would have had to undergo training if he wished to use them with proficiency. Shao Qia had sniped and touched them before in Kudu, and thus he knew them like the back of his hand. Leaving aside the question of whether King Yi himself knew how to use it, if he had known that Huo Lingyun knew how to use it, he would not have kept Huo Lingyun by his side without so much as a precaution against the latter. Huo Lingyun pursed his lips, his expression solemn in the silence. After a moment, he answered, "Old Fong the 10th. This was one of the reasons why Old Fong the 10th had been willing to join hands with Huo Lingyun to remove King Yi from the equation. He was a fast learner when it came to using firearms, and he was able to move around by King Yi's side. What's more, he could pump him for information on the money vault, as well as keep an eye on King Yi's movements." After Dunzhou was reclaimed, Yang Qiu and Old Fong the 10th started feeling uneasy, Huo Lingyun continued. By the time Xizhou reached an agreement with Li Bei and Qidong, Fanzhou and Dengzhou were already facing the situation of having armed forces being sent to quell them. They were afraid that King Yi could not hold up under threat and ended up opening the gates to surrender, so they thought of making the first move to do away with him and empty out the money vault. Huo Lingyun used the money vault as bait and burned Yang Qiu and Old Fong the 10th to death. This sum of money was now in his hands, and he was the only one who knew where it was. This was also what gave him the confidence to dare to negotiate with Shen Zichuan and Shao Qi. Huo Lingyun's gaze alternated between Shen Zichuan and Shao Qi. "I can use firearms, and I can teach the Li Bei armored cavalry and the Xizhou garrison troops." He looked at Shao Qi. "You want to attack Duanzhou in the second month. You can swap me over to the vanguard squad. I can lead the remaining garrison troops of Dengzhou." Kneeling at the side for a long time, Fei Xing's countenance promptly changed. It was only after he composed himself for a moment that he said, "It's not my place to interrupt before Master, but this matter concerns the safety of both Duanzhou and Second Master, so I'm left with no choice but to say a few words. This man is dodgy, and it's inappropriate to put him by Second Master and Master's sides. Second Master has no lack of generals either. Besides, there's also Elder Yin following along this time." Fei Xing was really exercising due diligence now. His misgivings towards Huo Lingyun were not without reason. Yin Chang was clearly the one who conquered Fanzhou. If not for this Huo Lingyun's underhanded tricks, Yin Chang would not have gotten a dressing down. This was just great now. Yin Chang took down Fanzhou, but Huo Lingyun ended up getting the lion's share of the credit, making it look like it was only because of Huo Lingyun's act of arson that they managed to take down Fanzhou. And that was not all. Fei Xing found Huo Lingyun to be a man who could endure and dared to be ruthless. When he made his move, he struck with efficiency and decisiveness. His vindictiveness was almost on par with Shen Zichuan. Such a man had both capability and a mind of his own. To let Huo Lingyun remain by Shen Zichuan's side was to threaten Fei Xing, and Fei Xing had no desire to give Huo Lingyun the opportunity to stand out and steal the show. Fei Xing was very clear on how things worked, and he also knew where his own opportunities lay. He dared to speak up to interrupt now because he could tell for sure that Shao Qia did not like Huo Lingyun. Sure enough, Shao Qia did not want to answer Huo Lingyun at all. He needed the firearms, but he did not need Huo Lingyun. Duanzhou could only be his, Shao Suan's, playground. He had stopped over in Xizhou for such a long time, spending every single day at the Baiyuan military drill grounds and donning heavy armor to train with Haragu's scorpions, all just to find a breakthrough that could change the current situation in Libei and turn the tide in its favor. If he were to change the vanguard to Huolingyun, then it would undoubtedly be a heavy punch to the guts of the Libei armored cavalry, whose morale was already low to begin with. Shun Sichuan's waist and back started aching after sitting for a long time. The swollen teeth marks on the inside of his thighs had yet to subside. What he had told Xiao Qie in the morning about his mind being in a whirl was not a lie. And now, his mind was in a fog all over, no thanks to the white scorpions. They still had to start sending provisions to Dunzhou in the afternoon, and the rations needed for the battle in Duanzhou had to go first. Then, there was also the thorny issue of whether Huolingyun could be put to use, or not. Since young Master Hua has his mind set on it, Yao Wenyu said to Shun Sichuan, "Your lordship, the imperial bodyguards have been recruiting new recruits recently, haven't they?" "That's right." Shun Sichuan understood Yao Wenyu's intent right away. Put Huolingyun in the imperial bodyguards, and Huolingyun would not be able to act as he pleased given Fei Xing's misgivings of him, and with Xiao Tianya at the side watching over them, Fei Xing could not go too far trampling over Huolingyun either. Not only could they put him at a distance away from Shun Sichuan by doing this, but they could also put him to use instead of letting him go to waste. What's more, leaving both Xiao Tianya and Huolingyun as double restraints to hold Fei Xing in check could also serve as a warning to Fei Xing, who was gradually becoming more and more aloof, reminding him not to let success go to his head. "Fei Xing," Shun Sichuan said, "pick from the remaining Dengzhou garrison troops. We'll take everyone who meets your recruitment standards, including this young Master Hua." Fei Xing only had to think about it to understand the intent of this order. His heart sank, but he had to put on a show of accepting it gladly. "I shall respectfully follow Master's arrangements. But these Dengzhou garrison troops are all Huolingyun's old acquaintances. They may not necessarily be willing to serve in the imperial bodyguard. That will be because you are not rewarding them enough." Xiao Qie raised his left hand and turned the ring on his right thumb back to its original position. There was no smile in his eyes. Once they join the imperial bodyguards, they are no longer natives of Dengzhou. Their names in the previous military register of Dengzhou can be struck off. Xiao Qie said just enough to make his point. The imperial army the second master took in during his early years was even harder to deal with than the Dengzhou garrison troops, and his way of managing his subordinates had been none other than to be fair in meting out rewards and punishments. Xiao Qie was reminding Fei Xing that these remaining soldiers of Dengzhou could break away from their registered place of origin once they joined the imperial bodyguards and even be exempted from field taxes in Sizhou. As long as he could do a good job carrying out the task Shun Sichuan had instructed him, what could he not achieve? Fei Xing understood what he meant and hurriedly acknowledged his orders. It was already late by the time the meeting was over. Xiao Tianya pushed Yao Wenyu back to their courtyard. The slab stone paths in the courtyard had all been cleared, with not even a speck of snow on it. They had gone out of the way to sprinkle salt too, for fear that the wheelchair might skid while going up. The newly planted plum blossoms had all withered, the fallen red dead in the embrace of its branches. Encased in ice and snow, they presented a scene that appeared particularly bleak and desolate. The road today was damp, so Xiao Tianya walked slowly, keeping the wheelchair stable and steady as he pushed it along. Yao Wenyu's cat was called Hunu. One, if it were not stretching itself and licking its paws under the eaves, it would be nestling on Yao Wenyu's knees, sleeping soundly with its belly exposed. At present, it was a little bundle of energy as it kneaded its paws on Yao Wenyu's sleeves and nuzzled itself hard against Yao Wenyu's palm. Yao Wenyu lowered his fingers to scratch Hunu. The lanterns at the sides shone upon the sides of his face. He had gotten a little fleshy lately, and he looked a lot better as compared to the time when he had first arrived. This was the Yao Yuanjua of distinguished demeanor and ethereal appearance. Xiao Tianya did not speak. His gaze shifted to Yao Wenyu's collar before he averted it to the cuff of Yao Wenyu's sleeve. They had not exchanged a single word today. The wheelchair entered through the door, and the attendant under the eaves headed in to deliver hot water. Yao Wenyu sat in the inner chamber and read his books, while Qiao Tianya took off his blade and stood outside to look at his own zither. A long time elapsed, and the servants all withdrew from the room and closed the door gently. Usually, Qiao Tianya was the one who personally bathed Yao Wenyu without any help from the others. Yuanzhua liked to be clean, and he would not sleep if he did not bathe. Every time Qiao Tianya wiped his hair, he would sit quietly. He seemed to have accepted the sari figure he was currently cutting, but only to the extent that no one else other than Qiao Tianya was permitted to look. This was the limit of what he could bear. Qiao Tianya stood for close to an hour before he finally heard Yao Wenyu call out in a low voice from inside. Qiao Songyue. Qiao Tianya's fingers that had been strumming faintly across the zither strings came to a halt, but he did not respond, as though he had not heard him. After a moment of silence, Yao Wenyu continued. Time for bed. The wind chimes beneath the eaves stirred, drawing in the loneliness in the wind as well. Yao Wenyu saw, through the hanging drapes, Qiao Tianya's shadow cast upon it. He seemed to have stood there for quite a long time. On hearing Yao Wenyu, he paused for a moment before lifting the drapes to enter. The candlelight was very dim. The Yao Wenyu of this hour did not yearn for light, for this was the beginning of his frailty and helplessness every day. Hunu burrowed into the bedding and swatted playfully at the corner of the blanket, completely unaware of the awkwardness in the room. Yao Wenyu had yet to school the expression in his eyes when Qiao Tianya bent forward with calm and composure to carry him up from the wheelchair. Their clothes touched, and Qiao Tianya placed Yao Wenyu's arm on the back of his shoulder. At the same time, Yao Wenyu made contact with Qiao Tianya's back, his fingers curled slightly. Yuanzhua was a very reserved man. That was the effect of his upbringing as a gentleman of virtue. Qiao Tianya untied Yao Wenyu's hair. It was at this moment the expression in his eyes was focused, so focused that Yao Wenyu could not bring himself to meet them. All he could do was to lower his own eyes to avoid Qiao Tianya's gaze. When he had been stripped down to his inner garment, Yao Wenyu muttered softly, "Don't." Qiao Tianya paused for a moment without letting go of the belt he had been pulling at. Yao Wenyu suddenly clenched his collar with an expression similar to indignation. He repeated, "Don't." "Don't what?" Qiao Tianya, who had been silent this whole time, looked at him, his face a picture of calm. Yao Wenyu's, "Don't touch me," caught in his throat. He stared at Qiao Tianya with bloodshot eyes, as though Qiao Tianya was some great scourge. His palms trembled slightly, yet the word that came out of his mouth was still, "Don't." Yao Wenyu pursed his lips tightly and started to struggle. He pushed against Qiao Tianya's chest, rejecting the latter's touch. The rattan chair creaked. Flashes of green and white shook in the blurred mirror as wide-sleeved robes and black hair struggled in the crooks of Qiao Tianya's arms, like spring leaves that were all too anxious to make their escape with the wind. Qiao Tianya let him make a scene as he pleased. Just when Yao Wenyu was about to slide onto the ground, Qiao Tianya suddenly overturned the rattan chair, grabbed Yao Wenyu's wrists, and pinned him down forcefully onto the woolen carpet. "What do you want?" Qiao Tianya held down Yao Wenyu's wrists with one hand and gripped Yao Wenyu's face with the other hand to correct its direction. "Do you want me to throw you in like this, or throw you here?" Yao Wenyu was forced to tilt his head up. His breaths quickened as he shut his eyes, biting down on his lip until it went pale. Qiao Tianya released the hand that was grasping his chin and pressed them between his lips to prevent him from biting down on them. He wedged his fingers in, only for Yao Wenyu to clamp down on them as if he was venting his anger. "What are you afraid of?" Qiao Tianya let him bite, his expression slightly cold. "That wasn't your fault." The intoxicated Yuanzhua of last night was very different. He briskly forgot the pain of his legs and had a reaction to being touched in the bathtub. A noble young master was still human, What he had lost were his legs, not all that made him a man. He was still so young, and he still had all the same unspoken desires that he kept secret. But he did not even have the opportunity to pleasure himself, and yet he was laid bare and exposed in Xiao Tianya's eyes every single night. Even so, he never accepted such a powerless self. "What's wrong?" Xiao Tianya asked in a harsh voice. "Feeling aggrieved because I'm not a woman? My handjob can't be that bad, right?" "Stop it." Yao Wenyu's face betrayed his agony. All he could do was to yell dispiritedly as he lay here, "Don't say a word more." The rattan chair that had rolled to one side knocked into a small clothes rack, which tilted over and smashed into Xiao Tianya's back. Xiao Tianya did not even blink. Under the flickering candlelight, Xiao Tianya did not know which part of him was in a rage either. "How do you see yourself?" Xiao Tianya asked. "Do you think of yourself as a banished immortal? Too, is it wrong to have desires?" I don't." Yao Wenyu's eyes had gone thoroughly red. His voice trembled as he struggled to say, "I don't have that sort of. I don't need them." He could not sink to such lows and have his very last shred of dignity destroyed. What would he be left with then? He only had this bit of dignity left, and it was this bit of dignity that sustained him so that he could sit before the others in this weak and frail state and accept all of their pity. As Yao Wenyu trembled, tears trickled out of his eyes. They did so against his will, but his tears were beyond his control, just like his crippled legs. He was ashamed to face this side of himself, just as he did not dare to face whatever remained of his desires. Xiao Tianya's chest heaved. He abruptly flipped Yao Wenyu over. With a sense of foreboding, Yao Wenyu's eyes widened in panic as Xiao Tianya pulled him into his arms from behind and undid his inner garment. Yao Wenyu struggled violently, pushing against Xiao Tianya's arms as he resisted. "I don't want to." "Xiao Songyue, release me, let." Xiao Tianya groped for Yao Wenyu's hand, pulled it into his palm, and let it down to hold Yao Wenyu's object of shame with his hand over the latter's. It was in this way he embraced Yao Wenyu and heard Yao Wenyu crying when he was neck to neck with him. The dim candlelight went out as they clung close to one another in this space. Yao Wenyu's face was to the woolen carpet, his cheeks wet with tears from the unbearable shame and indignation. A suppressed cry escaped his throat, a cry for the dignity he lost in Xiao Tianya's hands, and for the self he had gotten a clear look of. He panted for breath in between his sobs, his free hand clutching tightly at Xiao Tianya's sleeve as the pleasure of being defiled and broken into pieces in Xiao Tianya's masterfully sliding palm washed over him. "Kill me!" A choke escaped from Yao Wenyu as he rasped, "Xiao Songyue, I hate you to the core." All the while that Xiao Tianya's palm was gliding up and down in that darkness, he was pressed up against the side of Yuanjua's face, listening to Yao Wenyu's sobs and ramblings, as well as Yao Wenyu's pants and rasps. "You're not in the wrong." As Yao Wenyu shuddered, Xiao Tianya whispered into Yao Wenyu's ear, his voice raspy as he said in all seriousness, "Hate me all you want." Chapter 204. Empress Dowager. Chapter 204. Empress Dowager Shao Qia deployed troops to Duanzhou in the second month, and Shen Zichuan had the grain wagons set off first. Tantai Hu, who was in Dunzhou, was all prepared and ready. To the north, Shao Jiming dispatched Wu Ziyu to lead 5,000 Libei armored cavalrymen to stand by at the northern side of Mount Luo. Once there was a change in situation, they would be able to combine forces with Shasan camp to jointly attack Duanzhou. Fine snow danced at the spurring of the breeze on this day. The outskirts of the city stretched on into the distance, where a panoramic view of the empty, boundless horizon provided a treat for the eyes. Shao Qia was clad from head to toe in his heavy armor, which sank into the thin snow. He looked just like a block of wall standing before Shinzichuan. There are still bandits remaining on Mount Luo. Shinzichuan, wrapped securely in his coat, gazed at him. "You have to be careful when passing through the territory." Meng landed on Shao Qia's shoulder. "I'll remember it." This has to be a quick battle. I'll be back in the 3rd month at the very latest. If the soldiers you send to Dengzhou aren't enough, let the commander-in-chief know. She can transfer soldiers from Tianfei Watchtower. No problem there. Snow brushed past the hair on Shen Zichuan's temples and landed on his collar. Xiao Qia raised his hand to set his palm down on the top of Shen Zichuan's head. A quote inexplicably came to his mind. For my wife is still in the springtime of life, and tender are the words to comfort my beloved you. Lanzhao was only 22 of age this year, and he would be by his side for decades to come. Xiao Qia, however, would be fighting battles on all fronts in the days to come, regardless of life or death. Overthinking and dwelling too much on it would only serve to make him timid. Shen Zichuan was the reason Xiao Qia became tough. He was also the reason that Xiao Qia mellowed. Xiao Qia wanted to protect this man until the very end of his life, and as such, he was willing to give his very best in every single battle. But even the strong, like Xiao Fangxiu, would also come to an unpredictable end. Xiao Qia thought plenty after that incident. He loved this man, but he also worried for this man. Perhaps other people in this world did not need him, Xiao Suan, that much. But Shen Zichuan did. I'll wait for you here. Shen Zichuan raised his palm to caress Xiao Qia's cheek. In a soft voice, he said, "Don't fool around with others on the way. Not even a glance." All of a sudden, Xiao Qia hugged Shen Zichuan. In this snow, as he huffed breaths of hot air, he felt as if he owed Lanzhao too much. The latter clearly could not even leave him in his sleep. "Ensconce yourself in the throne at the Hall of Distinction." One Xiao Qia nuzzled against Shen Zichuan's temple and whispered, "And let not the snowstorm come unto you." Without waiting for Shen Zichuan to answer, Xiao Qia released him. He put on his helmet, flipped atop Lang Tao Shuijin, and turned his horse around to lead the Libei armored cavalry into a gallop east. Seeing that Shen Zichuan did not move, Fei Xing held up the umbrella to shield the prefectural lord from the falling snow. Shen Zichuan stood in the snow, clutching his blue handkerchief until it was silent all around. Kudu experienced consecutive days of clear skies, and one could occasionally catch a glimpse of the birds flying in diagonal formations between the double-eaved roofs of the imperial palace. The heir apparent was a fast learner. Although she still did not possess the authority to make decisions, she was allowed to listen in on the discussions on state affairs in Mingli Hall. She rarely spoke up, yet in that pair of eyes of hers, Tsinyu saw her dedication to government affairs. Other than reading and practicing calligraphy in the past 6 months, Li Jianting had no other hobbies. She rose early each day and did not even slack off on the days when she fell ill. The Chief Surveillance Bureau, which used to lecture Li Jianheng in the past, gradually could not find any shortcomings in Li Jianting they could admonish her for. In the eyes of these fastidious censors, this heir apparent was one who was the most like a proper crown prince since the crown prince of the reign of Yongyi. Even Kong Qiu, who was initially quite critical of her, no longer took to talking about her lightly. No one knew how Xue Xiuzhua had done it, but he had completely destroyed Ling Ting, and now only Li Jianting existed in this world. The Empress Dowager had been plagued by headaches lately. Initially, incense had been lit in the hall, but she had matron Liuxiang snuff it out as the scent made her feel unwell. The amount of gray hair along her temples had increased. Old age was eroding this person of power who had a hand in the storms and turmoil of Kudu for as long as 30 years. In the face of Li Jianting's youthful appearance, she felt all the more willing in spirit but lacking in strength. Yesterday, Han Qing presented a memorial to the throne. He's still requesting for troops to be deployed to Tizhou. The Marquis of Helion sat below and groused to the Empress Dowager. Conflicts are now abound between people on our own side. Why is he still thinking about Zhongbua? The Empress Dowager let matron Liuxiang massage her shoulders as she leaned back on the couch. She looked over Han Cheng's memorial, then said, "Shen Zichuan has taken down Fanzhou, and now he even intends to use military forces in Duanzhou. After spring, He will become the tiger of Zhongbua. He harbors a deep-seated hatred towards Han Qing for the murder of his teacher. It is only natural for Han Qing to be afraid. The Marquis of Helion did not want to bother with Han Qing's personal feud at all. What he was currently worried about was of another nature. After the 9th month last year, the Practical Doers faction led by Shuexiuzhua collaborated with the Chief Surveillance Bureau to investigate the crop fields of the 8 cities in preparation for the resurveying of the crop field. This had always been the case for the past years, but those had been merely done for show. The officials going on inspection tours simply went through the motions and visited the 8 cities as a mere formality to get things over and done with, then submitted a figure that everyone had agreed on beforehand to the Grand Secretariat to muddle their way through the process. But it seemed that Shuexiuzhua was serious about it this time. I told all of you in the past to tell the rural manners you have in your names to restrain themselves. But did anyone listen? How many people froze to death in winter last year? Other than the 3 cities of Diqing, Jincheng, and Quanqing that provide disaster relief to save the people, everyone else would rather be cowering cowards. The Empress Dowager tossed the memorial onto the small table. The eastern pearls by her ears swayed along with her voice. Why did Pan Lin have to antagonize Shuexiuzhua? Now Shuexiuzhua is going to work with Xin Yu and the rest to investigate the accounts. Was this not an opportunity Pan Lin himself served up to him? The Marquis of Helion married Commandery Princess Zhao Yu to Pan Lin's younger brother, so their Fei clan and Pan clan were now both in the same boat and would sink or swim together. He had initially thought the marriage would be an insurance against future troubles given that 3 members of the Pan clan, Pan Xiangjie, Pan Lin, and Pan Yi, were all significant officials of the imperial court, but who would have expected this Pan Lin to be such a pain in the ass? The Marquis of Helion did not dare to take the blame for Pan Lin, but he could not let Pan Lin continue with his ways either. Pan Lin was currently stuck in the opening that was the Minister of Revenue. The job he did was significant and crucial, yet he did not receive a promotion in name. Everyone was wrought with anxiety, fearing that Pan Lin would keep on getting defeated in this tussle between both sides and ended up handing the Ministry of Revenue on a silver platter to the officials from humble origins. Chengji is impatient by nature. I have no idea how he offended Shuexiuzhua. The Marquis was restlessly burning with so much anxiety, he was like an ant on a hot pan as he pleaded. But Pang Xiangjie and Pan Yi are both loyal to your majesty. You have also watched our Zhaoyue grow up into a lady. She and the 3rd Missy are, the gall of you. The Empress Dowager cut him off and even righted herself to berate him. How dare you push political disputes of the court onto my little baby? Back then, when I wanted Zhaoyue to marry a lad of the Han clan, you refused and insisted on coveting that bit of petty advantage the Pan clan could offer you. Now that things have gone south, you have to shoulder the responsibility for it yourself. The Empress Dowager rarely flew into a rage like this. The palace maids and eunuchs both inside and outside the hall hurriedly fell to their knees and bent low over the ground, holding their breaths. How would the Marquis still dare to sit? He fell to his knees in a fluster, shuffled forward on his knees, and slapped himself several times as he pleaded, "Your Majesty, please be appeased." The 3rd Missy has already been married away to Qidong, the Empress Dowager declared solemnly. She is the First Lady of Qishu. With a proper rank now, every word she says and every action she makes comes under close scrutiny. The encroachment of the commoners' fields by the rural manors under you people has nothing to do with her, so don't bring this up again. You're already at such an advanced age. Do you still need me to teach you to watch your words? You're right, the Marquis of Helion was not a man with guts to begin with. The only lawful descendants of the Fei clan in this generation were the younger Marquis Fei Shi and the Commandery Princess Zhaoyue. Fei Shi spent his days fooling around, and even now, he still did not hold a proper official position. Because of this, the Marquis of Helion hesitated over the Commandery Princess Zhaoyue's marriage for a long time over every little thing. Who would have known that trouble would still come knocking on his door? The Empress Dowager rose to her feet. With Matron Liuxiang supporting her, she made her way over to the Marquis of Hulian's side. The Marquis was up in years, and for what it was worth, he was still a noble. It was a disgrace for him to keep kneeling like this. The Empress Dowager calmed down some and said, "Get up. This is so unbecoming of someone your stature." The Marquis of Helion scrambled to his feet and stood helplessly by the Empress Dowager's side, not daring to stand too close. The Empress Dowager raised her head back slightly to look along the palace eaves at the bright and clear sky. After thinking for a moment, she said, "Fei Shi has also come of age. If his inclinations do not lie in scholarly studies, then he can join the military. There are so many vacancies in the 8 great training divisions. Let him learn from them. He doesn't need to carve out a distinguished career, as long as he can temper himself and settle down. Once he has put in the hours and has the record of service to prove it, he will naturally be promoted to the Ministry of War." The Empress Dowager had pointed out the Marquis's sore spot. He only had Fei Shi, this one son, and he had kept him sheltered back at home ever since the latter was young. After Fei Shi entered society, he was adept at all things related to the drinking of wine and the soliciting of courtesans, except for learning. What's more, he was an obstinate one who was close friends with Pan Lin. To date, he was not even willing to show Xue Xiuzhua due respect. He spent his days wallowing in vice on Donglong Street, typically listening only to what the courtesans had to say. The Marquis of Hulian's eyes momentarily grew moist. He lifted his sleeve to wipe his tears. "Your Majesty is the compassionate mother of all in the world. Your graciousness knows no bounds." This humble subject originally wanted him to join the 8 great training divisions as well, but with that temperament of his, alas! The Empress Dowager was fed up with the Marquis of Helion. She knew what he meant. The 8 great training divisions were no longer a glamorous, lucrative post that managed Kudu's patrols. Given its proximity to Zhongbua, they might even be deployed to fight wars in the future. The Marquis of Helion was reluctant to send his son in to give his life for the cause for fear that Fei Shi might meet with a mishap on the battlefield, so he was hoping the Empress Dowager could get Fei Shi into the 6 ministries instead. But Kudu was now no longer the playground of the noble clans. Domestic strife and foreign invasion were imminent. Shen Zichuan was not eliminated from the equation, and in just a short 6 months, he had become the overlord of Zhongbua, working in collusion with Li Bei. If not for the pressing threat of the Bianxia cavalry, he would have already fought his way to Kudu by now. Qi Juin, on her end, had also written a letter to Kudu saying that she was going to use military force against the Qinshu tribe in the 4th month. Meanwhile, Xue Xiuzhua was pressing in on them every step of the way. Although he professed it to be a private feud with Pan Lin, his impeachment memorials were all legitimate. The 8 cities did indeed encroach on the people's fields, and it would be a tough battle once investigations started after spring. The situation was already at such a stage, and the Marquis of Helion and a few others were still only thinking of themselves and those small tracts of fields their rural manors have for fear that they would be confiscated. The Empress Dowager recalled the times during the reign of Xianda. From Hua Xiqian to Wei Huaigu, which of them was not a capable minister or general? And now, the Marquis of Helion was a bungling oaf who was good for nothing, Pan Xiangjie was a fence-sitter who swayed where the wind blows, and Han Qing was a rapacious one with wild ambitions. Dealing with the Grand Secretariat exhausted the Empress Dowager, both physically and mentally. Xue Xiuzhua's investigation of the 8 cities' fields is meant to pave the way for the heir apparent to ascend to the throne. The expression in the Empress Dowager's eyes was deep. It's still not time for the heir apparent to step into the limelight. Go back and make it clear to Pan Xiangjie that he should open up the granaries in Danqing and Chuanqing to distribute the grains as aid relief, while the snow has yet to melt. Clean up the accounts in his hands as well, and return all those unnecessary fields to the people. Shuexiuzhua does not have the power to abuse as yet. If he wants to investigate, then let him investigate. Alarmed, the Marquis of Helion exclaimed, "If those accounts were to fall into this hands, it'd be hard to exculpate ourselves." The Empress Dowager looked at the Marquis of Helion and said, "Pan Lin has served in the Ministry of Revenue for so long, and the appraisals of him have been good. He also has capable men working under him. Shuexiuzhua wants to assist the Chief Surveillance Bureau, but even so, he can't sidestep the Ministry of Revenue. The previous year's field records are all in the Ministry of Revenue, which also manages the auditing of the account book. Pan Lin can avoid arousing suspicions. Just get him to appoint someone he can trust over. Get through this, and Shuexiuzhua won't have any way to force the issue." The Marquis of Helion pondered it over for a brief period. Pan Lin has a man named Liang Tsuishan under him. He was originally promoted by the Emperor Tianqian during the public ditch incident, and he has also been guided by Pan Lin before. This person's appraisal last year was outstanding, and he also has a good reputation with the officials of humble origins. His home is in Kudu, and he doesn't have much of a history, which makes it most convenient for us to hold him in our grasp. As long as the Pan clan can survive this, the Empress Dowager said, they will be able to come out of it for the better. Since there were problems with the fields in the 8 cities, then just how clean could the Shui clan's Quanqing be? Shuexiuzhua's audacity in touching the 8 cities' fields account was tantamount to laying a hand on a slice of the noble clan's pie. This matter concerned the future interests of the noble clans, and no doubt heads would have to roll if the field taxes were to be investigated. The Empress Dowager wanted Pan Lin to use Liang Tsuishan to choke off the opening in Danqing. As long as the investigation could not move forward and the bookkeeping was messed up, they could make things difficult for Shuexiuzhua on the imperial court and turn the tables around to investigate his Shui clan's Quanqing first. Under the sunset glow of the setting sun, the Empress Dowager took off the prayer beads on her wrists and tossed them on the couch. Incense smoke from the prayer hall behind her rose in spirals, accentuating the Empress Dowager's dignified and poised appearance that almost belied her old age had it not been for her gray hair. Chapter 205. Duanzhou. Chapter 205. Diuyanzichoyu. It was not until the 2nd month that Qi Juin received a reply to the memorial she sent to Kudu. She read it over while she was at the residence in the Tsangjuan Commandery, then said to Qi Xiu, who was lying on the bed, "I said to fight the Qinshu tribe, but the Ministry of War dismissed the notion. The Empress Dowager told me to wait as she's concerned about the military expenses, but Zhongbua is already at war now. I'll miss the golden opportunity if I wait any longer." Qi Xiu was getting much better these days, although he stuttered a little while lying on the bed, and he had to clutch a handkerchief in his hands when he spoke. Hurry. Qi Juin distorted his meaning and set the letter down. "That's right. I'm in a hurry. How could I not? When it all comes down to it, the defeat of Li Bei's troops will not benefit Qidong in any way." Only then did Qi Shiyun complete his earlier words. "What's the hurry?" While leaning back in her chair, Qi Juin heard her father's concubine in the courtyard wailing and making a commotion. She had ridden for half the night on her horse last night before arriving, and here she was now, sitting and relying on strong tea to keep her spirits up. Furthermore, she still had to ride back later. Vexed on hearing the cries, she said to Qi Xiu, "Can you tell her to shut up?" The concubine in the courtyard had given Qi Xiu a son before, and now she was the picture of a tear-stained beauty as she leaned against her maidservant and sobbed out loud in the direction of the room, "Old master. Can't you even let me see the old master? Commander-in-Chief, how very heartless of you." Qi Wei stood still under the eaves as he watched that particular concubine cry until her eyes were all red and swollen and she was almost sliding to the ground. He clicked his tongue lightly and shuffled his feet around to face the wall. Listening to her was giving him a headache. Qi Xiu could tell which concubine this was. Before he had a stroke, He was a tender one towards the fairer sex. He clenched the handkerchief tightly, his chest heaving violently as he shouted with all the might he could muster, "I'm telling you to shut up." He then paused to catch his breath for a moment and covered the corner of his mouth with the handkerchief as he addressed Juin. "Li Bei has no, that was so many years ago." Juin took over the conversation for him. "You're already at such an age, and you still want to sulk about his old lordship? The commanding generals of Li Bei's battle camps are quite the interesting batch. They are no longer the same as they were a decade or so ago." Then Xiao Jiming and Xiao Qia. It was a strain on Qi Xiu to speak, and even he had to frown on hearing himself. He tried his best to speak more coherently. "Can they beat Amur? By deploying troops now to clean up their mess, the Empress Dowager will view you with suspicion. Once the battle is over, watch how Kudu takes you to task." Several decades back, Qi Xiu was the Prince Charming of many Dazhou ladies. He came from a distinguished background, and he was handsome. Of the 4 great generals during the reign of Yongyi, he was the earliest to make his name in Qidong. Even Feng Yixing was a high-ranking military officer under his command. At first, he had hopes of being conferred the title of a prince, but who would expect Xiao Fengshu to rise to prominence in Luoxia Pass all of a sudden? The Li Bei armored cavalry elbowed out the Qidong garrison troops' military glory, trampling over Qi Xiu for life. There was no enmity between them, although they loved to pit against each other and had even fought before in Kudu. Qi Xiu made little of Xiao Fengshu's humble origins, and Xiao Fengshu once called Qi Xiu names for being just a pretty face that was all looks and no substance. Feng Yixing was the oldest among them when he was still around, and it was all because he went to a lot of effort, with Lu Pingyan following his lead, that Qidong and Li Bei could stay brothers for so many years. Qi Xiu rose to the challenge to prove his worth, but never could he have expected himself to be without a son and heir of lawful birth. At first, he had the idea of having Qi Juin marry Xiao Jiming, but he felt rather awkward deep down and eventually did not broach the topic. "Take me to what task?" Qi Juin removed her blade. "If Li Bei is gone, so is Zhongbua, and if Zhongbua is gone, Danqing will be a goner too. Who is the Empress Dowager going to take to task? Herself? For all their shortcomings, Xiao Jiming and Xiao Qia are both his old lordship's sons. With that bit of capability Han Qing has, does he have the ability to stop the Biantia cavalry when the time is nigh? Everyone might just as well let the state perish." Qi Xiu was rendered so speechless by her that he wheezed for breath. Qi Juin poured a cup of tea while she was at it and continued, "You should rest for a while." "No." Qi Xiu's obstinate nature took center stage as he childishly tossed the handkerchief at Qi Juin. "You foolish woman! Bargain with the Empress Dowager. At least have a noble title to your name before you go to war." Qi Juin fell silent for a moment. She knew Qi Xiu's heart was aching for her. She had served as the commander-in-chief of the military forces of Qidong's 5 commanderies for quite some years, but she still had no noble rank. If she were to get injured or disabled in the future, all Kudu needed was a transfer order on paper, and they would be able to remove her. At the very least, you'd have a reputation in life and, Qi Xiu's voice started trembling, status in death. Otherwise, 100 years on, she, Qi Juin, would just be a woman of the Qi clan. No matter how illustrious her military achievements had been, she could never leave her rightful name and title behind. Qi Juin held the teacup with her fingers and studied the patterns on it. A soldier only knows to die on the battlefield for his country. What need is there to concern himself with the return of his body home after? If I were to really die in battle, etch my name on a memorial tablet too at home, it's all the same. She raised her head and smiled at Qi Xiu. Our Qidong is under the control of others, and we have to discuss every single matter with Kudu. As long as the Empress Dowager is willing to give us military provisions, I can do away with a title. It is what it is. Whether it was because of his old age or not, no one knew, but Qi Xiu suddenly started shedding tears. He would not even let Qi Juin wipe it away for him as he hung his head down and choked with sobs. If only you were a boy, Qi Juin folded the handkerchief and set it down beside the bed. When Qi Xiu was a little better, she continued, brothers who have died before in battles are aplenty, but can each and every single one of them leave their name behind in history? General Feng was not conferred a title either, was he? I'm telling you this so that you know how things stand. We are really going to war this year. Before the turn of the year, I heard that Chen Zhen was in ill health. It's also because of his powerlessness that the Ministry of War did not agree to my deployment of troops this time. Once he retires, we will have no one else in Kudu. I'm worried that it'll be even harder to ask for military salaries and provisions. We should save on the various expenses in the residences as much as we can. Stop getting swayed by all those pillow talks. Those concubines of yours have the manners they want and the shops they ask for. Even if I die, they and those sons of yours won't starve to death. Qi Xiu said, miffed, all the manners I gave you were used to make up for the shortfall. Qi Juin thought for a moment before comforting him. There's a small plot of land left though. My mother used to plant flowers and herbs there, and I couldn't bear to sell it off. I can still make a living with it in the future. The concubine outside went silent. It was an overcast afternoon, with thick clouds covering the sky, and it was even dimmer inside the room with the drapes let down. Qi Xiu looked at his daughter from the couch, her skinny shoulders set against the weak light from the window, and his late wife's hairpin in her hair. Qi Juin resembled her mother, and she looked charming when she smiled, especially when her imposing aura did not dominate her facial features. The commander-in-chief was not as full of heroic spirit as the rumors made her out to be. Qi Juin waited until Qi Xiu fell asleep before she left. She changed her shoes under the eaves, then stepped into the snow with her deerskin boots to ask Qi Wei, "Where is she?" Madame invited her away. Qi Wei answered as he followed behind her. Qi Juin had yet to see Hua Xiangyi upon her return, and she hesitated for a moment. As she passed by Hua Xiangyi's courtyard, she heard sweet, delicate voices like the pleasant trillings of orioles and sparrows from within. From where she was on the other side of the moon gate, she saw Hua Xiangyi in between that plum blossom branch. Hua Xiangyi was bundled up in a fox fur robe today. Going by the quality of the material, she had most likely brought it along from Kudu. It was pure, unadulterated white. Fluffy fur lining the sides of her cheeks accentuated her clear-as-autumn water's eyes, bringing out the vividness in them and making them appear even more distinct. She looked just like someone's pampered daughter. The fingertips on the plum blossom branch were fair and dainty, never having been tarnished with a single speck of dust before in this life. Qi Juin inexplicably inclined her head and watched for a long time. The in-house accountant has prepared the account books and is waiting for you in the office. Our residence's expenditure last year, after saying a bunch, Qi Wei looked up to see that Qi Juin had not moved, so he followed her gaze over. Qi Juin raised Zhuzhou and blocked Qi Wei's view with its sheath. On the other end, Hua Xiangyi picked up the plum blossom branch with her fingers. A petal-like flower embellishment lay between her brows. She laughed as her maidservant whispered in her ear, then turned sideways where she was hidden from view. Without turning her head, Qi Juin said to Qi Wei, "Let's go." Qi Wei, having not seen a thing, repeated, "Let's go." Qi Juin lifted her foot and left. Qi Wei, not making head or tail of what was happening and not daring to ask either, followed after her. Qi Juin headed straight to the office to reconcile the account books with the accountant. She did not have the time to sit and settle down, so she simply stood and flipped through a couple pages. "Has there been a change of steward?" Qi Juin suddenly asked. The accountant hunched over and answered in a small voice, "To answer the commander-in-chief, no." "That's strange." Qi Juin turned a few more pages. The balancing of accounts has always been a mess in the previous years, with records that couldn't be more vague than the last. So why are last year's accounts so clear? These accounts were more than just clear. Even this year's advances had been separated out in a separate book, with the expenses of the various branches of the family all listed out clearly. Her father's concubine's cosmetic spending had also been halved at Qi Juin's request, while the manners Qi Xiu could not explain were also listed on it. This was simply done more beautifully than the Ministry of Revenue's accounts. The accounts in our residence were originally diverse and complicated, and with the various concubines unable to give a detailed account of their spendings, the various gentlemen were all at a loss where to start. The accountant took the teacup and held it out with both hands to Qi Juin. The commander-in-chief wanted the residence to be more frugal, but we couldn't get a clear count of the rural manors in our name, and the monthly tributes were a mess when combined with the logistical expenses. Qi Juin raised her eyes to look at the accountant. This time, it was Madame who did the accounts. Afraid of incurring Qi Juin's displeasure, the accountant hurriedly added, "Madame manages domestic affairs, so she has to look through all the accounts of the various concubines. She specifically sent someone to tell us that these accounts were too messy, and we had to redo them for the sake of your upcoming military salaries and provisions expenses. We rushed to redo them a few times, but we couldn't stand up to the commotion the various concubines kicked up. Many of them had manners hidden, and they refused to tell the truth." This was true. Her father's concubines were all afraid that Qi Xiu would kick the bucket, and so they kept a tight hold on the manors and shops in their hands. They even kept fishing for more from the residents, and none of them spoke the truth when it was time to settle the accounts. Qi Juin did not live at home in the back courtyard, and her trusted subordinates like Qi Wei were all men that did not belong to the immediate family, so it was inappropriate for them to intervene. That was why these accounts had always remained a mess. She got a headache every time she thought of it. So it seems that this Hua III is a rather capable one. Qi Juin took the account book and said, "And the concubines listened to her just like that?" At first, they pulled a long face and gave her a hard time. The accountant said, "They are all mothers to the young masters, and they counted on the old master's affections to refuse to hand over the accounts. They even wanted to head over to the old master's courtyard to kick up a ruckus. Didn't the commander-in-chief put Miss Hongying at Madame's disposal? So she had Miss Hongying send the concubines who cried until they fainted back to her courtyard and called for a physician to take a look at them. The physician couldn't tell what was wrong, so she had them all buried in the courtyard." It did not immediately sink in for Qi Juin. After being stupefied for a moment, she parroted, "Buried in the courtyard? Buried in the courtyard." The accountant said, "This was just great. The concubines cried themselves a river and said they were going to complain to the commander-in-chief." "Huh," Qi Juin said, "complain to me?" So she gave them horses and opened up the gates to let them go. These concubines typically had to be waited upon even when they were getting dressed, so who would know how to ride a horse? Qi Xiu did not fancy women of such ilk. It was such a cold day to boot, and yet Hua Xiangyi would bury anyone who dared to go wailing at Qi Xiu's courtyard like she was planting radishes. In no time, the concubines passed out from the freezing cold. The matrons by Hua Xiangyi's side were all old hands the Empress Dowager had carefully selected. If the concubines dared to make a scene, then they would dare to switch tactics to teach those concubines a hard lesson. The concubines kneeled in the walkway and waited in attendance, but they could not even get a glimpse of Hua Xiangyi's face. When the concubines returned in tears to their own courtyards, their sons took over. "Oh, it's the young masters." Hua Xiangyi sat behind the screen and said in a gentle tone, "I heard that you have yet to repay the debt of several hundred taels of silver you owe someone outside several days back, and they have already come hounding us at the residence. How would that do? As the lady of the house, I feel sorry for you brothers, so I asked the matrons to make the repayment first. Don't be afraid. The memorandums of debt with handprints and signatures are with me for safekeeping in case the creditors claim not to have received the payment and go looking for the old master later. Young masters, are you leaving already?" And that was how it went. The accountant was done mimicking Hua Xiangyi for Qi Zhuin's benefit. Madam has the young master's debts in her hands. She only has to report to us, and the young master's shops will all be transferred under her name as collateral. Who would still dare to make a commotion now? Qi Zhuin closed the account book and stood for a moment before opening it again. That's quite the temper she has there. This account had indeed been tidied up beautifully. Qi Zhuin could not help but wonder if she would still need to fear those wily old foxes from the Ministry of Revenue if the military accounts out there could be this well done. But Hua Xiangyi was, after all, the apple of the Empress Dowager's eye. So, after thinking about it, she dropped the idea. The snow gradually abated in the second month, and the number of sunny days in Cizhou saw an increase. Once Shen Zichuan had free time, he brought Yao Wenyu to the outskirts of the city for a stroll. It was cloudless for miles around today, with the bright, clear sky in a shade of azure blue. The snow in the forest had already begun to melt, and thawing stream water tinkled as they ran. There were already signs of wildlife to be seen. Ding Tao had to let Feng Ta Shuang Yi out to pasture, so he brought Li Xiong along to play at the edge of the forest. You don't look too well these few days. Shen Zichuan wiped his hands with snow and cast a glance at Yao Wenyu. Are you not sleeping well at night? Yao Wenyu's pale side profile was reflected upon the frosty leaves. He smiled at Shen Zichuan. It's cold and my legs are hurting, that's all. He paused. It has been half a month since the second master arrived in Dunzhou. Has your lordship received any news yet? Tantai, who discovered that there were still leftover bandits wandering on Mount Luo, so Suan was delayed for a few days there. It was reported the night before that the Mount Luo bandits have already been cleared out, and the Libei armored cavalry have occupied Mount Luo. Shen Zichuan had changed into a jade-colored narrow-sleeved robe with a long, velvet outer garment today that made him look even younger. He was wearing the dogskin arm guard on his right arm, and as he raised his arm, he whistled. Meng came spiraling down from the forest and landed on his right arm. Meng was too heavy, so Shen Zichuan could only let it perch for a while. He fed this messenger, which had been traveling to and fro on both ends, some white meat before letting it go off to play. There's no need to worry over Mount Luo. Yao Wenyu watched as Meng flew away. The difficulty lies in Duanzhou. The entire Duanzhou battle line was directly facing the Chaosha River, and it had been completely infiltrated by the Bianxia cavalry these few years. No one knew exactly how many scorpions lurked within. Xiao Qie only brought 5,000 imperial army soldiers along. The rest were all from the Libei armored cavalry. He was unwilling to completely give up the Libei armored cavalry, so no doubt he would have to find a way to deal with the scorpions in the Battle of Duanzhou. Shen Zichuan's heart was hanging on tenterhooks over Duanzhou. Now that the connection between the relay stations is running smoothly again, we will be able to send reinforcements immediately even if there is a change in the situation. Seeing Shen Zichuan's grave expression, Yao Wenyu said soothingly, besides, Second Master is a man blessed by heaven. Lu Guangbai said that Emperor is planting grains on the opposite bank of the Chaosha River. Shen Zichuan pushed aside the withered branch beside his ear. My concern is that he has long been wary of Zhongbua, and his placement of the crop fields near Gedale is meant to situate them in a better position to fight a protracted war with Duanzhou. Libei could not afford any delays now. If they could not take down Duanzhou, then the Shaosan camp would be in a rather perilous situation. Furthermore, Zhongbua was unable to completely shut their gate. Emperor had set his sights so far and wide that Shen Zichuan even felt that nothing from south to north could miss his eyes. Think back to last year's battles. Emperor first used Huhilu to hold down Guowei and give Hassan time to head up north. The Scorpions' infiltration of Zhongbua to smuggle supplies back then was to prepare for the time they stormed and seized Libei's battle camp. Now that he had used Hassan to take Xiao Fengshu out and reduce the pressure on the northern battlefields, he would have more confidence to face up against Qi Zhuin. He relied on the scorpions to hold Li Bei in check, then depended on the cavalry to engage Qi Juin in a deadlock. Zhongbo was the weak and vulnerable belly. As long as he could free out another leg, he would be able to stomp down the battle line that had only just been stabilized. The battle in Duanzhou would be a tough one. Yao Wenyu was just about to say a word when Fei Xing spurred his horse over. He dismounted to pay his obeisances to Shen Zichuan. "Master, Yen Heru is here." Shen Zichuan knew that Kudu was just done investigating Hezhou's transportation of grains by water to the capital, so presumably, Yen Heru was here to whine about it. Besides, they still had yet to come to an agreement regarding the new harbor of Liuzhou in Jueshi. Thus, he turned around and said, "Let's head back." Yen Heru was indeed here to whine and grouse. He arrived too late, and Zhou Gui and the rest sat with him and briefly discussed some Liuzhou matters with him. He only got down to business when Shen Zichuan returned and told him all about the issue with the shipments of grains by water in Hezhou. The official from the Ministry of Revenue, who was initially in charge of the transportation of grain shipments in Hezhou, is called Liang Tsuishan. He also led the collection of taxes on salt in Jueshi. Last year, he put the 13 cities in order with Jiang Qingshan. The reason our business has been difficult is all thanks to these two people. Yen Heru disliked how hard the chair was and shifted in his seat before he said, all bright and chipper, "Oh man, your lordship, I'm telling you, I really got worried there. This person is not an easy one to deal with, and he isn't one to accept bribes either. But guess what happened? Before I could think of a plan, he was transferred away. They said it was to investigate the crop fields of Danqing with the Court of Judicial Review. The Imperial Court has really done me a great favor." Shen Zichuan found this name to be a familiar one. He repeated, "Liang Tsuishan?" "Liang Tsuishan, courtesy name Chongshin." Yen Heru sprawled face down on the table and winked at Shen Zichuan. "Do you know him? You should have said so sooner. Then I don't have to worry about him anymore." Naturally, Shen Zichuan knew him. After all, Shen Zichuan was the one who had Xiao Qia recommend Liang Tsuishan for office. He promptly asked, "They had him transferred to Danqing to investigate the fields?" "That's right. Pan Lin is currently fighting it out with Shuexiuzhua. Shuexiuzhua is truly a real man to be stirring up the hornet's nest." Yen Heru said enigmatically, "Your lordship, guess how many fields have the 8 cities seized over the years? If Shuexiuzhua were to really get to the bottom of the accounts, even the Empress Dowager would be taken to task for it, let alone the Pan clan. At present, the noble clans all want him dead." The noble clan's appropriation of the commoners' fields had led to an increase in the numbers of displaced refugees. Those who had flocked to Zhongbo last year were all commoners who had been forced to leave. Qi Huilian relied on the implementation of the census registers to curb the problem, but it proved to be ineffective in the 8 cities, and now, Shuexiuzhua was using Yao Wenyu's matter as an opportunity to deal the first blow to the Pan clan of Danqing. Even Yao Wenyu had to concede that Shuexiuzhua had gut. Liang Tsuishan was promoted by Pan Lin. Shen Zichuan understood it in a flash. The noble clans want to rely on Liang Tsuishan's use of his Ministry of Revenue authority to obstruct Shuexiuzhua from investigating the lands and drag things out until the beginning of spring. What a fine show of battle between those in power. Let them kill their fill in the bloodbath. Yen Heru clapped his hands lightly and said to Shen Zichuan with a smile, "Best if they fight until Zhongbo is stable, and your lordship will be able to free a hand to teach them a lesson. Then I fear you'd be disappointed." With his folding fan, Shen Zichuan pushed away Yen Heru's fingers that had made their way before him. "This Liang Tsuishan." A commotion suddenly broke out under the eaves. Shen Zichuan stopped talking, and the gentlemen in the room all looked over. Zhou Gui rose slightly and inquired, "What's all the din about?" "A discussion is currently underway in the hall." Fei Xing lifted the hanging screen with a hand. His gaze moved past the others to land on Shen Zichuan, his face pale as he called out, Master, wind escaped from the dark vault of heaven, blowing over the corner of the hanging screen with such force that the various gentlemen all raised their sleeves to shield their faces. Shen Zichuan stood up. The expression in Fei Xing's eyes gave him a sense of foreboding. He even took a few steps forward as he stared at Fei Xing under the flickering candlelight. Incoming message of utmost urgency, Fei Xing said in a solemn voice, Second Master. Chapter 206. River of Ice. Chapter 206. River of Ice. Shao Qia's communications with Duanzhou were completely cut off 3 days after he left Zhongbua. They vanished in the snow after A Qi's return in resounding victory. Tantai, whose scouts could no longer find any traces of him. This squad of vanguards seemed to have disappeared into thin air. The Bianxia cavalry had set up a perimeter to the west of the Chaosha River, and this squad of vanguards had walked into the encirclement trap, where they were hemmed in by A Qi at the Chaosha River. Tantai, who had no way of searching the battlefields, but even as he waited anxiously, he had to deliver the news truthfully to Dying and Sizhou. If something untoward had happened to Shao Qia, then Wu Ziyu would have to immediately notify Guo Weili of the Shaosan camp. They had to head down south to block off access from the opening that was Mount Luo. Otherwise, the consequences would be unimaginable. Shen Zichuan did not take the horse carriage, but rode on Feng Ta Shuang Yi instead. When he arrived at Mount Luo, it was already late at night. Wu Ziyu trotted out to receive him and saw no expression on the prefectural lord's frozen blue face. Your lordship. Not daring to engage in idle chatter, Wu Ziyu cut to the chase and followed Shen Zichuan into the campground. The encirclement is located in the southeast of Duanzhou. It's mainly to stop Tantai who is still in the west, from proceeding further, and to deprive us of the chance to snoop around. For this reason, Second Master must still be in the southeast. Shen Zichuan stood at the entrance of the camp, his shoulders covered in snow. Who are the attendant officers tagging along? Gu Jin, Yin Chang and Harigu, Wu Ziyu answered. Second Master only had Tantai who stay put. Master, Fei Xing spoke up behind him. Why not let the Imperial bodyguards hurry over to Tantai whose camp? We can serve as scouts. By tomorrow night, Shen Zichuan had already turned around. He got on his horse once more and said to Wu Ziyu, Write a letter to Yu Xiaozai and Kong Ling, tell them to seal off all the Zhongbua's bridle paths heading west right now and have all the merchants traveling to the mutual trade market take a detour from Sizhou. Yen Heru had just gotten off the carriage. His backside had not even gotten comfortable when he heard Shen Zichuan's words. He still wanted to do business with Fanzhou and Dengzhou, especially now that these two places were suffering from a shortage of grains and clothing. Thus, he hurriedly ran a few steps after the horse and lifted his head to say, Your Lordship, come on, let's discuss this. Can the grains from Hezhou to the two prefectures still be allowed access? If so, why not, sure. Shen Zichuan's eyes were thin and icy. He bent down and patted Yen Heru's cheek with the horsewhip. But only grains. If your company of merchants dares to smuggle anything else other than grains to the east of Zhongbua before I give my approval, I will hang your head up at the city gate tower of Hezhou. The remaining bandits in the two prefectures of Fanzhou and Dengzhou had yet to be completely eradicated. So who knows if Yen Heru would play tricks again? Shen Zichuan was too preoccupied now to watch Yen Heru, but he had ways to make Yen Heru behave himself and stay put. Yen Heru did not dare to move. He meekly swallowed his saliva, not even daring to blink his eyes. It was only after Shen Zichuan turned his horse around that Yen Heru realized his legs were trembling. The Saker falcon soared through the dancing snow and wandered around the banks of the Chaosha River. The sky at the hour of Yu was dark and dreary, and the snow looked more like crushed grains of rice the closer they got to the ground. It felt uncomfortable to have them sticking to one's temples. The Gobi Desert stretched on endlessly into the horizon. Bayan, from where he sat on horseback with a book under his arm, looked out into the distance before him. There will be a snowstorm tonight. Bayan muttered in the Biantia tongue. The world was presently a picture of frozen landscape. Bayan could not bear the cold even when he was all bundled up in fur. Yet, He was squatting on the Chashire River washing his face with water from the hole cut in the ice. He rubbed his fingers clean, staining the water bloody red. "I'll send you across the river tonight." He's right arm had a scorpion tattooed on it. His face, which was as dark as Bayan's, appeared a little good-natured. Bayan was the brains by Hassan's side. He initially worked under Huhilu, but was now transferred over to He's side to observe the Duanzhou battle. He was the eyes Hassan put here. 7 days ago, Xiaoqia arrived at Duanzhou. Their siege on the city was unsuccessful. The Biantia cavalry had already learned to use the weapons from within the city of Duanzhou itself. With the advantage they had from their occupation of the city, they left Xiaoqia out in the cold outside the city gates to wear him down. 3 days ago, Xiaoqia launched a surprise attack, and He left the city to give chase. He chased them down near the Chashire River, where he annihilated the left flank squad of the Libe armored cavalry. Bayan turned his head back and said to He, "Perhaps I should stay for a few more days. Hassan needs you." He stood up and lifted the Libe head in his arms as he said to the scorpions on the bank of the river, "The Libe armored cavalry is already at the end of their tether. This pack of wolves is helpless against us. Last night is the proof. They can't withstand a single blow just like they couldn't before the new year." He threw away the head in his hand. "The armored cavalry is no longer our medal of honor, they are not worthy." The scorpions, who were mingling among the cavalry, followed He's lead and booed as they threw away the heads at the side of their horses. They were collecting the helmets of the Libe armored cavalry, using them as nighttime chamber pots in the wilderness. He turned to Bayan. "We are elites of the scorpions. It's not a good idea for the hero to put us in Zhongbua. If I kill Xiaoqia, you have to tell Hassan to transfer me back to the northern battlefields. That is where I should be." This unit was the elites Amur left in Duanzhou. He was the leader of the Black Scorpions, having taken Haragu's place. After Jida's death, he became the undisputed despot of Duanzhou. He wanted to obtain lands, and so he had to think of ways to render meritorious military service. For this reason, he was already displeased with Amur's arrangement to leave him in Duanzhou. "You are all the natural enemy of the wolf pack." Bayan placated He. "The hero naturally has his own considerations for his arrangements. His arrangement is to make me clear out the position for Hassan." The expression in He's eyes was gloomy. Hassan stole the credit from the scorpions. Bayan did not have the numbers and strength to back him up, so he could not start a dispute with He here. He swallowed his frustration and watched as He got up his horse and stepped onto the frozen ice surface of the Chashire River with the scorpions. The Chashire River would freeze over in winter, and the layer of ice was strong and solid enough to bear the weight of the Biantia cavalry. They liked to pass through the territory during winter in the past, as this would allow them to cross the Chashire River without having to take a long detour. The slender waist of the Chashire River was close to Gedale. If they moved fast, they would be able to arrive in one night. The snow started to intensify. Worried that his book would get wet, Bayan kept it back in his leather bag. He wore a leather hat and a fur collar that covered his nose and mouth tightly, but even so, it was still so freezing cold that his exposed ears turned red. Spring had better come soon. He's horse trotted beside Bayan. "Many people in Gedale have died of starvation this winter. They gave all the grains they grew to the northern battlefield. This battle is a must for Biantia's transformation into a lion. We have too few fields," Bayan said in a muffled voice. "There is no extra land in the desert to grow food. It's only by attacking our way west that we can survive. Zhongbua is a good place, you actually don't have to hate it that much. If my unit puts down their iron hammers, they will once again be reduced to being slaves of the various tribes." The iron hammer at the side of Chi's horse was stained with blood all over. He shook his head. We will not till the land. As the Scorpions' leader, Chi had once negotiated with Amur. The Scorpions wanted lands and names. It would be best if they could be merged into the 12 tribes and not serve as slave. But Amur rejected him. He required the Scorpions to completely crush the Libe armored cavalry in this battle, and it was only when Libe fell would he consider Chi's suggestion. Bayan was merely part of Hassan's retinue and could not question the hero, Amur, but he understood Amur's intent. Amur was unwilling to give the Scorpions names because he wanted to hold them captive in his hands. Only then would these homeless bastards truly put in their best effort. The troops walked on the ice for 4 hours, and the snowstorm obscured the directions in the night. Chi came next to the route markers the Biancha cavalry left behind, and did not immediately stop. He wanted to escort Bayan to the opposite bank as soon as possible, then head back to annihilate the remaining Libe armored cavalry and clean up the Duanzhou battlefield. Xiao Qia was a nobody, but he was a wolf pup through and through. It was to the regret of Biancha that Hassan did not bring back Xiao Fengshu's head. Chi had his eyes locked on Xiao Qia. He wanted to use Xiao Qia's head to negotiate with Amur again. They attacked Libe relentlessly and without reservations, for they were already fed up with the stalemate in the northern battlefields. Bayan lifted his fur collar and drank a couple mouthfuls of water. The wind and snow blew so hard that he could not open his eyes. As he attempted to cover himself, he shouted at Chi. Let's stop for now and rest here. The snow is too heavy. The Saker falcon was unable to continue flying and had already landed on its master's shoulder. The wind blew the snow on the ice into slopes, which gave off creaking sounds with every step taken. Chi dismounted to scout the path ahead. He swept off ice that had formed on the route markers, only to discover footprints before him. Given how intense the snow was, there could only be 2 reasons why there could still be tracks left behind. The first was that they were too heavy and had compacted the ice underneath. The second was that the other party had left not too long ago and was very likely standing right next to them across the curtain of snow. The wolf is here. Chi estimated the depth of the footprint with his fingers, then lifted his head to shout, The armored cavalry has been here. Bayan waded through the thick snow, huffing and puffing as he kneeled and lay in front of the footprints. But they were heading west. That's the way back to Zhongbua. These footprints were all facing the direction that they had come from. 3 days ago, you took out the left flank of the Libe armored cavalry. Bayan looked towards Chi. But their vanguards aren't dead yet. It is very likely that Xiao Qia led them to escape their way onto the frozen Chasha River. They're looking for the way back. It could also be a cover-up. Chi prodded at the snow. They could have walked backwards so that they would be able to hide ahead of me and set up an ambush. Bayan shook his head lightly, frowning as he watched the snow. It doesn't benefit them to head east. That's where our territory lies. Chi swiftly swept aside the snow along the footprints and saw that these footprints were all heading westward. He knew how Xiao Qia had taken Huhilu out of the picture. In his heart, this person was adept at bluffs and ambushes. The more obvious the footprints were, the more he was certain that Xiao Qia was right in front of them. We'll take a detour. Chi got to his feet. Even if Xiao Qia stays on the ice, he can't go without water to drink. They will definitely leave traces behind. We'll go after them by following their track. Bayan thought it was not the opportune time tonight to cross swords with the Libe armored cavalry. He chased after Chi. If we can't stop here to rest, we should still continue to head east. Chi Dajo has a saying, do not pursue a beaten enemy too far. 2 don't get led astray by them. Let's return to Gedale first before making our plans. Chi shoved Bayan aside, exposing the scorpion on his right arm. His eyes were filled with murderous intent as he said, the wolves are right here in this heavy snow. If we let them go, it will not bode well for us. You have absolutely no idea how to fight a war at all. By letting Xiao Qie remain on the Chaosha River, our unit could end up getting ambushed by him tomorrow morning. As Bayan watched Qi mount his horse, he reached the end of his forbearance and could not help but shout out, "I once advised Hu Hilu, but he didn't listen to me. In the end, he didn't even leave a corpse behind." Was this how you advised Hassan? Qi turned his horse around and spat with contempt. So that was why he lost the King of Wolf's Head. It was all to preserve his own life. Having said that, Qi cracked his horsewhip and headed southeast. Qi. Bayan chased a few steps after him, then spat hard and cursed under his breath. Bastard, you won't be able to tell the directions once you veer away from the route markers. Qi galloped among the snow without turning back. If he could not find his way around, then neither could Xiao Qie. But he was more familiar with the Chaosha River than Xiao Qie was. The wolf was close by, and Qi was going to catch him. Footnotes literally lion, also a metaphor for a strong or powerful tribe/nation/figure, etc. One should not press a defeated enemy so hard, lest they turn and make a last-ditch counterattack in desperation. I.e., don't force people into a corner, as they may fight back desperately like cornered rat. Chapter 207, Played for the Fool. Chapter 207, Played for the Fool. Gu Jin lay prostrate on the ice for an hour. Hail that came with the snowstorm rained down his armor, making clunking sounds. He remained motionless. If not for his eagle eyes still blinking, Yin Chang would have thought that he had frozen to death. Yin Chang huddled in the snow and took small sips of his wine. It did not take long for the wine in the wine bag to run out. He shook the empty bag and drained the last few drops into his mouth. Flying flakes of snow pelted his cheek. The old man's hair and beard were all white, only his nose remained red. The wind wailed and howled in the night, making such a terrible racket that the tips of the Imperial Army's ears went numb. The rations in their bellies were almost gone, and even though limbs would naturally stiffen after such a long time of sprawling, very few of them moved. Yin Chang turned his head back to cast a glance at the Imperial Army and marveled to himself. The Imperial Army did not even blink when they faced up against the Scorpions a few days ago. Without Xiao Qie's order, they would never act arbitrarily on their own. Who could still associate these men with the ruffian soldiers who did manual labor in Kudu? If the Zizhou garrison troops could be rallied to the same degree as the Imperial Army had been, then Yin Chang would even dare to fight Gedale, let alone Duanzhou. A pity these were not his soldiers. Yin Chang pouted regretfully and put the wine bag back on his waist. Snow had accumulated on Gu Jin's back. He was not wearing a helmet, and the snow fell onto his nape, where it melted and trickled down along his neck. It was amid the violent gale that he detected those slight movements. Fragments of ice swirled and rustled across the snow. Gu Jin's hand, which had been pressing down on the snow, suddenly clenched into a fist. His eyes bore through the flying sand-like snow before locking onto a certain spot in the darkness. Here they come. Yin Chang prostrated his body and lightened his breathing as the sounds of horses' hooves approached. The old man's palms were sweating as he counted in silence, fearing that he might start shaking his legs out of overexcitement. The kick-up of snow turned the snowy fog in the sky into thick clouds. The ponies' hooves were almost about to trample over their faces. Yin Chang let loose a bellow. In the twinkling of an eye, he had already sprung up. But the other party's ponies came to a stop. Yin Chang had not even drawn his blade when a scorpion's hammer came swinging over inches from his face. Yin Chang did not have the same arm strength Li Xiong possessed, so naturally, he did not dare block the blow. All he could do was roll into the snow and cut a sorry figure as he dodged it. Motherfucker, that's some fine arm strength there. Yin Chang cursed as he steadied himself. The Imperial bodyguards behind him leaped out of the snowfield. At first, they had wanted to imitate Yin Chang and spring up in one suave move, but on seeing the old man bested, they all gave up the idea and opted to draw their blades without all the fanfare. Once the Scorpion's hammers came up against the Imperial Army, They knew they had fallen for the trap. This was not the Libe armored cavalry at all, but a bunch of impostors in helmets. Helmets off! Gu Jin clambered up the pony that was speeding past him, and held onto the saddle as it brought him up. With both legs scraping across the snow, he slammed the hilt of his blade hard into the side of the scorpion and turned over to forcibly seize the pony. Once again, he commanded sternly, "Helmets off!" Helmets clattered noisily into the snow, and the Imperial army leaped into the unit of cavalry. They were like mice who did not care how these Biantia cavalrymen ran as long as they could startle the ponies. The snow under the hooves fell away as a hoop of rope net rose from its hiding place, bringing down a number of cavalrymen in the process. Snow and sand came assailing them in the face. He's soldiers took several mouthfuls of ice and snow in the mouth as they tumbled. The Imperial army's blades were short. Once they came in close before the scorpions, the iron hammers would prove tough to fight with. Regardless of whether the scorpions extended or retracted it, the Imperial army's short blades would outspeed them, giving them no time at all to parry the blows. Gu Jin rapidly observed the battlefield, but he did not catch any sight of He. His heart promptly sank. But before he could voice a warning, a branch of cavalrymen came dashing out from his left at a speed so fast Gu Jin could not even dodge. The Imperial army seemed to be bitten down by a vicious beast that had materialized from across the sky, breaking them up in front and at the back. This unit of cavalrymen did not use iron hammers, but they directly knocked Gu Jin straight off the pony with their swift and sudden advance. At the same time Gu Jin landed on the ground, it neighed, and a hot burst of fresh blood sprayed all over Gu Jin's head. Cunning! He rebuked Gu Jin in the Dajo tongue. He brandished his own scimitar, flinging the remaining droplets of blood onto Gu Jin. But that's all there is to it. The scimitars He's elite scorpions used were larger than those used by the common Biantia cavalrymen. When held in hand, they looked like thick, silver hooks. Get caught in them, and one would meet their end, whether they were humans or beasts. He had smelled a rat while he was following the trail. There were simply too many clues left for him along the way. It was like they were exposing the enemy's presence and location to him. Very quickly, He's windblown brain calmed down. He used his advance guards unit to probe the way ahead, and sure enough, he had baited the Imperial army out of hiding. Gu Jin inclined his head to wipe away the blood on his face and spat lightly. "Is that so?" Yin Chang, who was on the other side, gave up resisting. Surrounded by the cavalry, he spread his arms open, his half-crouching body looking like he was going to lift something as he said at the top of his voice, "Time to get up." The layer of ice under the cavalry's hooves shook violently. They thought the Imperial army had smashed open a hole here and instantly reined their horses in and retreated in fright. However, as soon as they retreated, they saw Yin Chang lower himself in a roll along with the Imperial army. They sprang their way out between the hooves, then dragged up their blades and took to their heels. "We've been had." He's fury blazed, and he cussed in mixture of Dajo and Biantia expletives. But he did not immediately give chase. He was still keeping his wits about him at this point, thinking that there must be a trap somewhere. It was only when Yin Chang and the Imperial army fled further and further away that it finally hit He. They're really fucking fleeing for real. Split up and give chase. He cracked his horsewhip. Hack off their heads! The cavalry was split into two flanks, with He in the center, presenting a claw shape that overlooked the squad, one that seemed to clutch the Imperial army within. The two flanks advanced first and went around the left and right to come before the Imperial army. As long as they could join up with the other, they would be able to form an encirclement ring. When the time comes, He would lead the center unit to barge their way into the Imperial army from behind, and then it would be a slaughterhouse with the scimitars set loose within. 7 years ago, Amur used this type of battle formation to ram the Duanzhou garrison troops into the Chashire sinkhole. He, thus inspired, was extremely fond of this formation. It was also with this formation that he shredded the left flank of the Libe armored cavalry into pieces near Duanzhou a few days ago. Both flanks, moving hard and fast, had already overtaken the imperial army to circle to the front. They turned their horses, and their units looped around like a long snake to the center, intending to block the imperial army's way out and to hem them in. But a familiar figure was standing in the center. The battle steeds did not neigh in the darkness of the night, although cloudy puffs of hot air spouted from their iron muzzles, and their armors looked particularly ferocious in the pitch-black surroundings. The armored cavalry towering motionlessly on horsebacks loomed large amid the raging snow and wind, cutting off the sounds of slaughter with their silence. The vanguards on both flanks, having crossed swords with the armored cavalry before, were not afraid, so no one shouted the command to stop. The ponies kicked up snowy haze as they came attacking from both sides in a pincer attack, while the scorpions who served as the vanguards of both flanks simultaneously swapped over to their scimitars. They wanted to throw the armored cavalry off their horses with one swing of their hammer at the very moment of impact, relying on their horses' hooves and arm strength to smash the armored cavalry's helmets in like they had done so countless times before. Xiao Qie sat on the back of Lang Tao Xuejin, which was presently digging into the ground with its hooves. Xiao Qie was clad in heavy armor, and with steel obscuring his face, no one knew the expression he was presently wearing. He was like a stabilizing force amid the chorus of shouts all over, steadying the morale of the soldiers before and behind him. Gu Jin exhaled deeply the very instant he saw Xiao Qie. He braked to a stop almost at the same time that Yin Chang did, then turned around together with the latter amid the waves of snow to assume a fighting stance while facing Eiqi's pursuing soldiers. The wind stirred up by the Biancha cavalry swept through the whole field. Their scimitars and hammers had been driving away the men of Dezhou. From Libei to Zhongbua, no one could survive the assault of their hooves. Xiao Qie expelled a breath of hot air between his thin lips. The scorpions on both flanks swung up their hammers. At the moment of collision, the smell of gunpowder assailed their noses. Flashes exploded in the snowstorm, and the scorpions, who were caught totally off guard, were blown off their horses by the firearms, while their horses collided into one another in panic upon hearing the thunderous blast. The muzzles of the guns started smoking. Xiao Qie had only brought along 30 firearms. They were of little use when facing the main forces of Biancha head-on, but it was the key to blowing away the heads of the two cavalry flanks at this moment. That oppressive power promptly blindsided the cavalrymen of both flanks to the extent that the scorpions at the rear could not even catch what was happening. Xiao Qie made the first move, and the Libei armored cavalry behind him followed suit to bare their brand-new fangs. These heavy armors were like vicious wolves that had been let out of their cages, so ravenous their eyes glowed with insatiable hunger. As they split into their respective columns, they leveled out their long blades in unison. Although Eiqi's center unit was obstructed by the Imperial Army, he had already seen the Imperial Army's blades. It was already too late for the two flanks of the scorpions to pick up their hammers again. The battle steeds raised their hooves and trampled over the tumbling bodies, splashing sprays of erupting blood onto their armors. The scorpions at the back of these two flanks surged forth to outflank them. Xiao Qie followed up by shrinking the Libei armored cavalry into a war chariot battle formation that swiftly and aggressively went ramming into them. Their structure of strung-up blades on all four sides prevented the hammers from inching any closer. As the armored cavalry started lunging, they resembled a battering ram, charging into the battlefield. Xiao Qie was at the pointed end of this formation. They were an unstoppable force when they came together as a cohesive whole. Reining in the battle steed beneath him, Eiqi snarled furiously from a distance away, "Swing your hammers." As long as they had hammers, the Libei armored cavalry would be tofu all the same. The hammer of a scorpion swung from the side towards the head of the armored cavalry at the fringe of the formation. It was too late to avoid the attack, but a resonating and heavy thud rang out as Haragu used an iron hammer to deflect the hammer from atop the Libe armored cavalry horse he was on. Traitorous betrayer! Aichi gnashed his teeth in rage. Haragu, you've become a slave to Libe. With swift, dexterous moves, Haragu heaved up the hammer to knock over the other party and landed on the ground at the same time the other man did. While the other person was still cussing, Haragu lifted his hammer and slammed it down with precision onto the man's skull without so much as a second glance. Aichi's center unit was caught in a dilemma moving forward. The left and right flanks he had sent ahead had respectively gotten their heads hacked off and were now nothing more than headless chickens. And with military commands hindered and obstructed by the Imperial Army, he could no longer freely mobilize the two flanks into returning. Bayan had only just rushed into the vicinity. He was aware of Aichi's importance to Duanzhou. The remaining scorpions in Zhongbua all heeded Aichi's deployment orders, and for this reason, he could not abandon Aichi to escape on his own. Bayan panted in the snow as he scanned the battlefield and chased after Aichi on horseback. Aichi, turn the horses around and head back. The Libe armored cavalry won't be able to catch up to us. As long as they followed the route markers and retreated west, then by daybreak at the latest, they would be able to make it back to the southeast of Duanzhou, where they had stationed a large number of troops. By then, the only path that awaited Xiaoqie would still be death. Aichi tugged at the reins of his horse hard and cracked his whip loud and clear. He did not refute Bayan, and led the remaining scorpions out of the entanglement with the Imperial Army. He was clear about his priorities. If he lost to Xiaoqie here, then Amur would mete out the harshest punishment on him and skin him for the rash deployment of troops. His defeat was a small matter, but if this carelessness escalated into the loss of Duanzhou, then even if he could live to escape back to Gedale, Amur would not spare his life. This battle did not count. Aichi whipped his horse hard to spur it on. This was merely just him being made a fool of. Chapter 208 Return of a Nightmare. Chapter 208 Return of a Nightmare. Aichi fled towards their original path in a hurry. Along the way, the scorpions let loose their own Saker falcons. Langtao Shuijin pressed forward and did all it could to catch up amid the clanging sounds of the heavy armors. The collective sound of the Libe armored cavalry's hooves in hot pursuit was so intense that it unnerved the scorpions, who feared the ice beneath their feet would crack. What's more, when that sound was catching up just right behind their horses, Aichi clenched his teeth and looked back in the wind in humiliation. All he could see was that one heavy armor. Xiaoqie. Bayan suddenly pulled in the reins on the head of his horse as he bumped into Aichi from the side and barked sternly, "Retreat, retreat, retreat!" Aichi, stop looking at him. The snowstorm that resembled flying willow catkins transformed heaven and earth into a sacred, untainted realm. The Biancha cavalry charged madly in the wind for a little less than an hour before they managed to throw off the Libe armored cavalry. Even so, they did not dare to stop. On returning to their original path, Bayan suddenly piped up, "Pull out the route markers. Don't leave them behind for Xiaoqie." They charged with all they could along their original path, heeding Bayan's instructions not to leave behind route markers for the Libe armored cavalry. Deploy troops to counterattack tomorrow morning. Bayan was covered tightly in his fur collar, and his eyelashes had been dyed white by the wind. He could barely even open them. Xiaoqie will not be able to escape out of the Chasher River once he loses all sense of direction. Aichi was livid. His rage blazed so intensely that his chest felt uncomfortable. He had been played for a fool by Xiaoqie even before they came face to face with one another. No matter what, he could not take this lying down. "Listen, Aichi." Bayan chased after the lightning-swift Aichi and pulled down his collar to shout, "Don't fall for his goading, you hear me? He did it on purpose. He wiped out both of my flanks." Unable to contain himself anymore, Aichi screamed back at Bayan. "He's flaunting his military might to me. That son of a bitch." 3 days ago, Aichi took down Xiaoqie's left flank troops, and today, Xiao Qie stood there and blew out He's left and right flank. The vanguards of both flanks were all elite. He's heart was dripping blood. He felt this to be a warning from Xiao Qie, and the threat was now rubbing it into his face. I'm going to kill him. He lost control and growled. I will kill. With one fist, Bayan punched He off his horse. Having lost its master, the horse slowed down and stopped ahead. He rolled in the snow, his chest heaving violently. The hero knows all. If you still want to merge the scorpions into the 12 tribes, then finish Xiao Qie off tomorrow morning. Bayan said in a deep voice. Losing your mind will reduce you to being a jackal, and a jackal can't bite a wolf to death. You'd best clear your head up. He lay on the snowfield and grabbed a handful of snow to wipe his face with. He climbed to his feet and caught up to his horse without so much as another word. The atmosphere surrounding the cavalry was glum and heavy. With He and Bayan no longer speaking, those at the back did not dare to open their mouths either. They ran in the snowstorm for another 2 hours, and their battle steeds were all exhausted to the point they were panting. Fortunately, the route markers indicated they had reached the end. The Saker Falcon will notify the reinforcements to hurry this way. He slowed his horse and stepped onto the bank. We can wait here. Bayan was feeling uneasy deep down. Due to his introversion, he took particular notice of his environment. The boundless expanse of snow obstructed the world from view and prevented him from getting a clear look at the situation a few steps away, but he could keenly sense that this was not the southeastern part of Duanzhou from where they came. We went the wrong way. Bayan muttered and squinted his eyes to keep out the gale. Amid the fog of snow that was being blown away, he indistinctly caught a glimpse of what lay ahead. This place is, a horse at the back that had yet to step ashore suddenly lost its footing, and its hind hooves slid into a hole in the ice. The scorpion on horseback yanked at the reins in the blinding snowstorm, intending to drive the horse back on ice, but in its panic, it broke its hind knees against the edge of the ice and neighed as its entire body overturned into the water. The unit was promptly thrown into disarray. The horses all started panicking, and the scorpions berated them to no avail. Fearing that they would slide in too, they could only lash out with their whips hard. He heard the sound of heavy armors among the noise. He initially thought it was a misperception, but not long later, the pitch-black armored cavalry materialized for real in the snow. No matter how dumb He was, he could also realize what was happening by now. He retreated and shouted, "Get on your horses and move fast!" This particular route marker was genuine enough, but Xiao Qie had long shifted it away from its original location. The footprints were indeed a diversionary cover-up. Xiao Qie's real intention had been to herd them towards this place. Seeing Bayan still in his original spot, He bumped into him hard and cursed, "Get on your horse! Snap out of your fucking daze!" Bayan turned his eyes to look at He. As if sensing it too, He looked ahead, and the color drained from his face in horror. The pitch darkness ahead was none other than the Chaucer sinkhole. He wiped the sweat at his temple and looked out as far as he could, only to see that both flanks of the Libe armored cavalry had already surrounded them from both sides and were now ahead of them. He turned his head back and saw Xiao Qie. 7 years ago, the Biantia cavalry buried 40,000 Duanzhou garrison troops alive here. 7 years later, on the same snowstorm night, Xiao Qie used the same battle formation to push them before the Chaucer sinkhole. He did not know Xiao Qie, but in this instant, he strangely understood Xiao Qie's intent. Bayan's Adam's apple bobbed. He squeezed his cowhide-bound book and muttered Hassan's words, returning the favor, tit for tat. Xiao Qie was the wolf that was the toughest to deal with. Bayan knew Xiao Qie would even bite Hassan to death in order to retrieve Xiao Fengshu. Once an opponent like this committed his scars to mind, he would retaliate and tear away at his foes with his fangs on his own terms. Reinforcements will be here in a while. He unexpectedly calmed down at this juncture. He stared at Xiao Qie. Hang in there until then, and this place will still be our slaughterhouse. He had never seen Xiao Qia's real appearance before today, but through that helmet, he seemed to sense Xiao Qia's scoffing. He did not believe in the Biantia gods. He believed in his own tattoo. As a scorpion surviving in difficult circumstances between the gaps, he would not concede defeat until the very moment his head took leave of his body. However, Xiao Qia similarly believed in his tattoo. That was his father, and also his Libe. The scar Hassan left behind burned all the time. He had suppressed it for far too long, so long he could even hear Lonely Blade howling in its sheath. The violent gale under the snowy dome rode roughshod over the snowflakes, tearing them into pieces of willow catkins flying in the wind. At the moment when the swarm of white blinded his eyes, He saw the armored cavalry charge. Their armors were like dusty blades, charging head-on towards the Biantia cavalry with the momentum of a tempestuous storm that brushed away all the dust on them to reveal sharp blades that glinted coldly in all its glory. The moment the iron hammer came swinging, Xiao Qia parried it with Lonely Blade. His horse did not stop as he led the armored cavalry to crash head-on into the Biantia cavalry amid the screeching sound of friction as blades scraped against blade. Meanwhile, the armor-clad Lang Tao Xuejin, clad in heavy armor, threw its head back and knocked askew a pony that was blocking the way. The Biantia cavalry was like a canteen that had been crushed until it burst. They resisted Xiao Qia's onslaught of heavy blows for just a mere few blinks of an eye before they were repeatedly rammed back in a retreat by the war chariot battle formation. The sinkhole stretched across them a short distance away. If they retreated again, they would no doubt plunge into it. He lifted the iron hammer that weighed 100 jin. One in this short period as they crossed swords, he had come to recognize Xiao Qia as the most vital part of the Libe armored cavalry. He knocked over an armored cavalryman before him with a swing of his hammer and heard the other man's head slam into the snow with a thud. Hooves stepped over the body, and in a split second, he was already swinging his hammer right in Xiao Qia's face. But he struck at empty air. He thought Xiao Qia would follow up his victory with an attack, but Xiao Qia did not. He retreated back in front of the Libe armored cavalry, and this war chariot instantly underwent a transformation. Bayan crowded at the back with his book in his arms, and got a clear look as the Libe armored cavalry transformed. Was that the Libe armored cavalry? That was a heavy-duty war chariot. Xiao Qia was unwilling to give up on Xiao Fengshu's heavy armors. He did not want to prove his old man wrong. It was through Lu Guangbai, Qi Juin, and Yin Chang that he acquired a whole new Libe armored cavalry. Xiao Qia cast away the former long blades of the Libe armored cavalry on the basis of them being heavy, and equipped the Libe armored cavalry under his command with new blades. These were the real long blades, with a length so long that there was no way for the iron hammers to get close. He had observed Lu Guangbai's infantrymen at the battlegrounds. The war chariot battle formation was able to conceal their weakness of not being fast enough. Xiao Qia directly cut off their need to give chase. He wanted the Biantia cavalry to come lunging into them themselves. That offensive and defensive battle Qi Juin fought in the war zone was skillful in its swap between light and heavy cavalry. Xiao Qia consolidated the imperial army and the Libe armored cavalry together. As long as they appeared on the same battlefield, they would have erratic and unpredictable ways of fighting. Hassan did not reign supreme when it came to field warfare. The last was also the most crucial point, Yin Chang's dagger squad. Yin Chang modified Lu Guangbai's war chariot battle formation and split the soldiers into daggers to advance onwards. Haragus secretly learned this move on the sly, allowing Xiao Qia to find a new opportunity back at the Beiyuan hunting grounds to turn things around. Xiao Qia then incorporated the dagger into his own war chariot formation, thereby giving rise to the current Libe armored cavalry of tremendous might and formidability. Very quickly, He came to understand that the iron hammers were now useless, as they could not avoid the long blades to get close to the Libe armored cavalry. But when he swapped out the iron hammers, the Libe armored cavalry would attack in columns. It was just like several bayonets suddenly flicking out of a box to stab at the scorpions until they could not even fend for themselves. Those bright, shiny edges of the blades extended and retracted at will. This was equivalent to a heavy-duty war chariot, one that discarded the wooden structure of the common siege weapons, was completely forged with iron and steel, and came with improved mobility. As long as Shao Chia was willing to give the go-ahead, the Libe armored cavalry could even dismantle on the spot and switch over to field squads to lay ambushes. Even though it was still in its infancy and was even a little raw around its edge, it was undoubtedly a Libe armored cavalry that completely belonged to Shao Chia. He saw defeat looming right before his eyes, but then he heard a falcon's cries among the snow. His Saker falcon retracted its wings and circled its way down the heavens, bringing with it the reinforcement troops he had been waiting a long time for. Why are there so many soldiers? Yin Chang was about to sit on the ground to pour away the watery blood in his boots when he saw the cavalry swarming out from the southwest like ants. He hurriedly clambered to his feet and stomped his feet into his boot. We're done for. This is almost fucking 3 times our military strength. The Scorpions' morale was instantly boosted. Sounds of killing crashed over them like the roaring waves as both parties engaged in a battle of life and death before the Chaucer sinkhole. Gleaming blood splattered through the snow. The Libe armored cavalry and Imperial army went all out. The only chance they had to break out of the encirclement was now. If they missed the opportunity tonight, they were as good as dead. Gu Jin lifted Harigu by his back collar and kicked him into the crowd of people. Seeing Yin Chang limping a little, he leveled his blade to strike away the Biancha cavalry and shouted to the old man. Elder Yin, are you injured? Yin Chang wrinkled his red nose, rotated his ankle a few times self-consciously, and answered, My foot is itching from all that soaking. Harigu nimbly dodged the scimitars from where he was in the crowd. Every now and then, he even had to flash his little golden token to the Imperial army, who had gone berserk from the killing. We're on the same side. On the other end, He, who was far more adept at wielding the scimitar than the hammer, was already battling it out with Shao Chia. The trampling and stomping in the tussle between both parties' troops caused the ground to shake. No one knew whose horse flipped over first, but following that, the edges of the sinkhole collapsed entirely, sending everyone tumbling into it in one jumbled mess. The Imperial army ingested several mouthfuls of mud and popped their heads out from among the dense mass of enemies to shout to each other. Fuck! Did Second Master get jostled down there too? As Lang Tao Shuijin rolled and sank into the bottom of the pit, He pounced from a rock. Unable to get to his feet in time, Shao Chia lifted his foot to kick He in the chest, causing He to stagger back a few steps from the impact. Meanwhile, Shao Chia had already straightened up. The hammer came swinging almost in his face, and as Shao Chia dodged the blow, he used his arm guard to block the attack. Thud! Feng Ta Shuang Yi knocked over the old and dilapidated wooden fence as Shun Zichuan galloped across the snowstorm with his overcoat flapping in the wind. Frosty snow flew between his facial features, his side profile reflecting a somber, forbidding harshness. Fei Xing, not daring to be complacent and careless on the battlefield, followed closely behind Shun Zichuan's horse with the Imperial bodyguards. Tantai Hu, not daring to let Shen Zichuan take the lead either, led his troops to chase after the prefectural lord with such haste that he was almost standing on his saddle. He shouted at Shen Zichuan across the gale, Your lordship! It's right in the northeast. The Chaucer sinkhole. Sprays of flying snow erupted under his horse's hooves. Shen Zichuan had gripped the reins until it was soaked. He had not made a single stop on the journey here, and Feng Ta Shuang Yi was already exhausted. Chaucer sinkhole. All that Shun Zichuan passed by on his way was a white, boundless expanse of wilderness. But the moment he entered the vicinity of Chaucer sinkhole, that nightmare came surging to the surface like a tidal wave, and the familiar stench of blood choked his nose and throat. Shen Zichuan gasped for air, unable to see Xiao Qie in the bloodshed. Shen Zichuan shouted in a grim voice. Xiao Sun! Fei Xing surveyed the surroundings and saw Yin Chang, who in turn saw the prefectural lord all dressed in white from afar, a rather conspicuous sight here. He jumped up and down, waving his blade as he shouted. The sinkhole, in the sinkhole, second master is in the sinkhole. In that instant, Shen Zichuan's face turned a shade of ghastly white. With icy cold limbs, he rolled off the horse. Even his hands that were holding on to Yang Shan Shui were trembling. Blood seeped through his white robe, wetting it as he stepped over the corpses. All he could see was the sinkhole that appeared in his nightmares millions of times. Shen Zichuan could not bother with anyone else. He stumbled along the sinkhole and slid down. Heavy snow filled all over the sky. He trembled as he shouted. Xiao Sun! Nightmare and reality overlapped. Shen Zichuan had seen his own body strewn among the corpses here before, but he had never imagined that Xiao Qie would be among those lying here. Fei Xing had never seen the prefectural lord in such a state. He hurried over to help him up, but Shen Zichuan refused. He dug up the body before Lang Tao Shui Jin among the bloodied mountain of corpses, raking so hard with his hands that they both turned slick with blood. The corpse suddenly raised a hand, and grabbed hold of Shen Zichuan's wrist with speed and accuracy. Lanzhao, Xiao Qie felt suffocated under the helmet. Shen Zichuan had already pushed off Xiao Qie's helmet. In that whirling snow, he got a clear look at Xiao Qie's face, and with no regard for the bloodstains, he hugged Xiao Qie's head tightly in his embrace. Xiao Qie backhandedly stroked Shen Zichuan's back. He wanted to say something, but in the soughing of the wind, he heard Shen Zichuan call out over and over in a small voice. Xiao Qie! Xiao Qie's heart ached with such ferocity that it broke into pieces. Chaucer Sinkhole was Shen Zichuan's darkest hour. Chaucer Sinkhole was Shen Zichuan's darkest hour. When he first entered Zhao Zui Temple, the insides of the temple were old and dilapidated, with broken windows that could not keep out the chilly wind. Ji Gang kept the only spot that was sheltered from the wind for him to sleep, and he would rest his head on his arms, not daring to tell his Shifu that he could not fall asleep. Back then, Shen Zichuan could still remember Ji Mu's face. There were shadows of Hua Pingting in his big brother, a handsome man with delicate features. The number of matchmakers coming to play go-between while he was still at home was enough to break their threshold from all those coming and going. I've been thinking about my promotion. Ji Mu was squatting in the courtyard, picking up dumplings to eat. Let's move to the eastern side once I'm promoted. Shen Zichuan imitated him and stuffed himself with dumplings until his cheeks were bulging. He nodded and slurred his words with his mouth full. I'll watch sister-in-law for you. Ji Mu had a childhood playmate, a maiden who originally lived next door to them and later moved away to the east. This maiden's father played up to those in power and was always thinking of marrying his daughter off to someone in the yamen. In order to prove himself, Ji Mu enlisted in the military and worked hard all day attending to official duties, hoping to wed the maiden before she was married away. Ji Gang did not earn much. Their family was not well off. With 2 sons to raise, Hua Pingting even saved her own dowry as funds for her sons' future weddings. Seeing as Ji Mu was already of age, she and Ji Gang contemplated engaging a matchmaker. Winter in Duanzhou was a scene of desolation. The Chaucer River lay to the east. When they were a little younger, they would go on to the ice in winter to pull sleds. Shen Zichuan was a smart one, and he always coaxed the little rascals who tagged along to be the horses while he himself played the old master sitting on the sled as he directed them to run all over the place. Ji Mu told Ji Gang at that time, "My younger brother will definitely go far in the future." Hua Pingting treated Shen Zichuan as her own son, and so Ji Mu treated Shen Zichuan as his own kin younger brother. When Xiao Qie and Xiao Jiming were in Libei riding horses and drawing bows, Ji Mu was still taking Shen Zichuan running around all over the mountains and plains. Shen Zichuan was very sloppy in his training of the Ji clan boxing style before he was 15 years old, but Jimu always covered for him and would not let Hua Pingting admonish him. In the 3rd year of the reign of Xianda, Jimu was promoted to squad commander. The entire family was delighted, and Hua Pingting started making arrangements by counting the family's savings over and over again as she and Ji Gang prepared to hire a matchmaker to propose marriage to the maiden in the east. At that time, Jimu had to be on duty. Shen Zichuan took the food Hua Pingting packed for him and went to the garrison troops' camp to deliver the meal to his elder brother. That night was the last time Shen Zichuan saw Hua Pingting. His Shenyang stood at the entrance of the courtyard, where she fastened his lined jacket for him and put on his fur collar. She covered him up securely and gave him the instructions to leave and return early. Jimu secretly gave Shen Zichuan wine to drink, and Shen Zichuan drank it by dipping his chopsticks in it, looking very much like a green radish wrapped in a lined jacket sitting among a row of tough and muscular soldiers. When the snow fell, these rugged men said that the timely snow was an auspicious omen for a good harvest. Duanzhou was going to have a bumper harvest next year. Jimu wrapped his chopsticks on the porcelain bowl and sang the tune, a song for peaceful and tranquil times. At that time, he was only 20 years old and was about to marry and bring home a pretty wife. Both brothers got along harmoniously with one another, and their parents at home were free from illnesses and worries. He was right in the prime of his life. Every time Shen Zichuan thought back to that night, tears would stream down his cheeks. He lost the courage to reminisce and walk down memory lane when he was in Zhao Zui Temple. He no longer dreamed of those times again. Over the course of 7 years in which he was plagued by nightmares, Ji Mu turned into a grotesque skeleton. Shen Zichuan forgot what his elder brother looked like. He could not even remember their last conversation. Why didn't he pull Ji Mu up? Shen Zichuan crawled his way out, then fell back in again. In the first few years, he would still lie within and cry inconsolably. And so, Shen Zichuan was left behind here. He stood up and saw the snow burying himself. Military boots trod upon the snow, making slight noises. Shen Zichuan apathetically turned his head back and saw a travel-worn Ji Mu in the snow. Ji Mu was clean this night, without a trace of injury on him. He held on to the hilt of his blade and approached Shen Zichuan. Ji Mu had not changed at all even after 7 years. His cheeks were slightly red from the freezing cold, and he huffed breaths of hot air as he walked. All that hostility during the struggle in the sea of blood vanished without a trace. Shen Zichuan looked at him and remembered the song for peaceful and tranquil times he sang before his departure. Shen Zichuan, who was already as tall as Ji Mu, called out wearily, "Go." Ji Mu stood still before Shen Zichuan. As the snowstorm tousled the messy hair on his temples, he asked, "Why aren't you going home?" "The snow is too heavy." "I forgot the way," Shen Zichuan answered. Ji Mu laughed as he looked at Shen Zichuan. "Silly lad. Mother's looking for you." Shen Zichuan looked back and saw Hua Pingting on the other end. Shenyang was carrying a lantern in the heavy snow, the hem of her skirt swaying in the wind. As he watched her, the tears started to gush from his eyes. He remembered everything. That was why he wanted to forget it all. Ji Mu held his blade steady and passed through Shen Zichuan to walk towards Hua Pingting. Shen Zichuan suddenly could not contain himself and shouted, "Go!" With a teary voice, Shen Zichuan disconsolately attempted to grab Ji Mu. But Ji Mu did not turn back. Shen Zichuan chased after him. Every step he took, the blood under his feet rose an inch. He hastily started running, but he could not break free of his shackles. Eventually, he fell into the pool of blood, where he was bogged down by corpses. He shouted himself hoarse after Ji Mu, "Come back!" Ji Mu was already about to vanish in the snow. Shen Zichuan failed to grasp hold of anything as the blood swallowed him up in the inundated sinkhole. The terror of drowning swept over him. He could not breathe. All he could do was struggle and look on helplessly as that faint light died out. Shin Lanzhao! Xiao Qie scooped up Shin Sichuan. Those sturdy shoulders of his could stand up against the assault of the storm. He brought with him the light of the blazing sun, and he used the strong wind to sweep this dark, gloomy world clean, dispelling the snowstorm. He was scorching hot, so scalding that there was no room for anything else around Shin Sichuan. Shin Sichuan abruptly returned to his senses. He was soaked all over through and through. Xiao Qie cupped his cheeks, touched the tip of his nose to his in the darkness, and kissed him soothingly. Still gasping for breath, Shin Sichuan wrapped his arms around Xiao Qie's neck, his eyes turning damp as they clung to each other in a snuggle. Xiao Qie leaned in closer to coax him. Lanzhao, come back to me. With his heart still palpitating, Shin Sichuan nodded. He bumped his forehead against Xiao Qie's and gazed at Xiao Qie with panicky eyes. Xiao Qie wiped the corner of his eyes with his thumbs and caressed his cheek. Everything is all right now. Xiao Qie dropped him a kiss each time he spoke. Give me a hug. The military tent was newly erected. The fire in the charcoal brazier did not burn strong enough and went out in the middle of the night. Both of them slept on a simple plank bed, padded with a thin mattress underneath, and with an overcoat blanketing them. Fearing that Lanzhao would fall sick, Xiao Qie grabbed his icy hands, stuffed them into his clothes, and pressed them against his own chest. Shin Sichuan's breathing calmed as he grasped at Xiao Qie's clothes until they wrinkled. Not once had Xiao Qie's arms ever let go of him, and it was in this position he covered them with the overcoat and whispered to him underneath. Are you cold? Xiao Qie asked. Shin Sichuan buried his face in the crook of Xiao Qie's neck and answered in a quiet voice, cold. Xiao Qie embraced Shin Sichuan tightly and pressed down in the center of the top of his head with his chin. With eyes half closed, he said, stick a little closer, and you won't be cold anymore. Both of them clung to each other for warmth, like a pair of mutually dependent cubs relying on each other for survival. Shin Sichuan reached out to feel his way to Xiao Qie's back, his touch so icy cold that Xiao Qie inhaled sharply. Touching that wolf set Shin Sichuan's mind at ease. His touch was careful and delicate, as though he was stroking a wolf's fur. The stroking of the prominent muscles on Xiao Qie's back tickled him, but there was nowhere for him to hide, so he could only tilt his head back slightly and endure the waves of tingling sensation washing over the small of his back. Eventually, he could no longer bear it and lifted a hand to grab hold of Shin Sichuan's wrist before turning over to pin Lanzhao down beneath him. His breathing was slightly heavy as he pressed up against him without moving. Shin Sichuan sulked in a huff. Didn't you want a hug? Is that what you call a hug? Xiao Qie leaned in closer to press down on him, then repeated his question in a whisper. Is that what you call a hug? Shin Sichuan was of the opinion that this voice was one that escaped from his throat. He looked at Xiao Qie, seeming to be choked with silent indignation. Xiao Qie released Shin Sichuan's wrist and slid his hand down along the latter's waist, his touch turning Shin Sichuan's face a shade of red. That was ticklish. Initially, he could endure it, but Xiao Qie pressed against him with his chest, stirring him up so much that his expressive eyes gradually glazed over with water again. In between short, urgent breaths, he tilted his head up and smiled. Xiao Qie loved Lanzhao's smile to the moon and back, when those half-shut eyes rippled with tidal surges of emotions, with his Xiao Suan's silhouette drowning in them. Shin Sichuan smiled until his neck turned damp and his clothes clung to his back, soaked with sweat. He felt tired as he calmed his breathing to welcome Xiao Qie's kiss. It was warm under the overcoat, so stifling that Shin Sichuan forgot all about the snowstorm. Xiao Qie knew Lanzhao did not sleep well, but tonight, he was here. And he was burning with the ambition to make sure that he was all Lanzhao ever dreamed of from now on.